This is Part 3 in the Verdant Paradox Book 2 in R.M. Stratton's military sci-fi series Concord Horizon. If you like the audiobook, the ebook is available on Amazon at the link in the description. 21. The Intervention. Vrolkson's quarters were quiet when the emergency beacon reached him. He had been seated near the window, reviewing the most recent lab summaries on his personal display while Houston moved into its morning rhythm beyond the glass. The apartment assigned to him by Coalition Navy was comfortable by human standards and excessive by children ones. Too much vertical space, too many surfaces. A bed large enough to make his species' sleeping nests seem like an old provincial joke. Still, after several weeks, he had learned the room's angles and tolerated its air. The alert arrived through the Concord comm channel first. That mattered. It did not come as a general coalition alarm, though those began pulsing through the headquarters network seconds later. It arrived through the formal Warden band, encoded under protected person emergency protocols. Coalition protectee under attack. The location followed. Academy perimeter. 3 blocks from the residential towers. Joseph Thompson. Vrolkson was already moving before the second line finished resolving. He did not pause to consider whether he had jurisdiction. He did. As a Concord Warden assigned to the Houston Cipher project, he had standing authority to act on Coalition soil in defense of a protected person connected to an active Concord-level artifact investigation. The legal justification had been arranged weeks ago, never discussed in front of the boy, never spoken of over meals or in the laboratory, but understood by Archuleta, Naval Intelligence, and Vrolkson himself. They had all known this possibility existed. None of them had wanted to name it. He crossed the room, took the compact Warden sidearm from its locked case, and secured it beneath his outer jacket. The weapon was scaled for children hands, precise and ugly, designed for short-range defensive engagements rather than theatrical intimidation. He added a restraint spool, a medical patch kit, and his authority badge. Then he left. The corridor outside his quarters had already shifted from ordinary morning to controlled alarm. A human officer in physical training clothes stepped out of the lift, saw Vrolkson, and opened his mouth to speak. Vrolkson did not slow. "Clear priority passage," he said. The officer heard the tone before he processed the words. He moved aside. Vrolkson entered the lift and used the Warden override. The descent took 14 seconds. Too long. At ground level, headquarters security had begun locking the residential tower's main entrances. Vrolkson crossed the lobby through rising alarm barriers and out onto the morning walkway. His comm built the map as he moved. First beacon. Vehicle reversal. Secondary movement. Naval intelligence response en route from the east. Marine security response from the Academy gate. 2 minutes out. 90 seconds if they disregarded traffic constraints. Joseph did not have 90 seconds. Vrolkson was old by the standards of his species. Age did not make him frail, but it did make certain calculations honest. He was not Kehlar. He was not human. He was not a Marine in armor with a rifle and the confidence of mass behind him. Children's were quick in short bursts, precise, difficult to strike cleanly if they chose their ground, but they were not built for sustained physical combat against large predators with weapons. His physical capability was real. It was also limited, so he did not run like a younger officer attempting to overtake a battle. He moved through the environment the way training had taught him to move. Shortest viable path, maximum cover, no wasted turns. Across the service garden, through the maintenance gate that opened to his Warden authorization, down a delivery access corridor between 2 administrative buildings, over a low barrier that irritated his left knee and did not matter. The first shots reached him as sound before sight. Muffled cracks, Vehicle armor struck. A heavier discharge from a weapon he did not immediately identify. Then the hard screech of tires on pavement. He reached the end of the service corridor and saw the rear of Joseph's vehicle swing into an alley half a block ahead. 3 figures moved behind it. Kehlar. Light armor beneath loose civilian outerwear. Compact weapons. Professional spacing. Not the first wave. A second team, positioned to cut off the reversal or disable the vehicle from behind. Volkson understood the geometry at once. The first group had blocked the road ahead. The vehicle reversed, as it had been trained to do. The second group closed from behind. A third force, perhaps ahead on the alternate route, would finish the trap. The operation was not improvised. He raised his warden's sidearm and fired before the Kehlar saw him. The first shot struck the nearest mercenary at the junction between shoulder armor and neck plating. The figure collapsed sideways, weapon discharging once into the pavement. The other 2 reacted instantly. Good troops. That was unfortunate. One dove behind the rear corner of a parked service hauler. The other turned toward Volkson and fired a burst that tore pieces from the wall beside him. Volkson dropped low behind the maintenance barrier and felt fragments sting across his cheek. Pain registered. He set it aside. Concord Warden, he transmitted on open local emergency band. Engaging hostile force at Academy Perimeter Service Alley. Protected person in vehicle. Responding units converge on my marker. Then he shifted 3 meters left before the Kehlar could fix his position. A children who stayed where an enemy had last seen him did not become an old children. The second Kehlar advanced too quickly, trying to close the range where size and armor would matter more than angles. Volkson fired twice. The first shot struck chest armor and failed to penetrate. The second caught the weapon hand. The mercenary snarled, switched grip, and kept coming. Volkson triggered the restraint spool. The device snapped open mid-air, a filament web spreading with sudden violence across the gap. It caught the Kehlar at the knees and chest, not enough to hold a creature of that strength for long, but enough to ruin balance. The mercenary hit the ground hard. Volkson fired once more. The Kehlar stopped moving. The third mercenary used that moment to flank him. Volkson saw the movement too late. A heavy body struck him from the side and drove him against the pavement. The impact forced the air from his lungs. His sidearm skittered half a meter from his hand. Kehlar weight pinned his lower body, one armored forearm pressing toward his throat. The mercenary's face was close enough that Volkson could smell breath, metal, and stimulants. "You are not coalition," the Kehlar growled. "No," Volkson said. He drove the heel of his palm into the release stud of the medical patch kit at his belt. The kit had not been designed as a weapon. It contained pressure sealants, clotting agents, pain suppressors, and emergency stimulants calibrated for children physiology. It also deployed under pressure. The cartridge burst against the Kehlar's face. The mercenary recoiled, blinded for half a second by expanding medical foam. Half a second was more than Volkson needed. He reached his sidearm, twisted beneath the weight, and fired upward into the exposed seam under the armor. The Kehlar jerked. Not dead. Disabled. Volkson pushed free with more effort than dignity, rolled to one knee, and pressed the sidearm against the mercenary's head. "Move," he said, "and you will die before you finish deciding to do it." The Kehlar went still. Volkson's breath came hard. His ribs hurt. His left arm shook with the unpleasant tremor of impact stress. He ignored all of it and secured the restraint spool around the surviving mercenary's wrists and ankles, adding a second loop, because Kehlar strength made optimism hazardous. Only then did he look toward the road. Joseph's vehicle was gone from the first alley. For one cold second, Volkson thought he had failed. Then his comm updated. Vehicle still moving. Emergency beacon active. Naval intelligence contact with first wave. Coalition response engaging. Secondary gate units converging. Alive. The boy was alive. Volkson rose carefully. By the time the first coalition naval intelligence officers reached his position, 2 Kehlar lay dead and 1 breathed through his teeth on the pavement, restrained and furious. Volkson identified himself, transferred local command authority for the prisoner, and gave a report so concise that the nearest human officer blinked at him. 3 hostile Kehlar. Second wave interdiction team. 2 neutralized, 1 captured. Equipment suggests deniable mercenary operation. Protected person's vehicle diverted east. Primary engagement ongoing. The officer looked at the 2 bodies, then at Volkson's bleeding cheek. You need medical. Yes, Volkson said. Later. Within minutes, the first wave was over. Coalition naval intelligence officers and Academy Marine security hit the attackers from both sides. The Kehlar who had stepped into the road ahead of Joseph's vehicle died before he could disable it. 2 more surrendered only after being shot and pinned beneath a security drone's suppression field. The rest attempted to scatter and found Houston headquarters had too many locked gates and not enough mercy. Joseph's vehicle stopped inside the secondary academy security perimeter, unharmed. Shaken, the report said. Volkson understood the inadequacy of the word. He watched from the edge of the scene as Staff Sergeant Vega helped Joseph out of the armored vehicle. The boy was pale, too still. His hands gripped the strap of his satchel as if it were the only object in Houston that had not moved. Archuleta arrived less than 4 minutes later. The Admiral did not run to the boy. Volkson respected that. He crossed the security line with the authority of a man who had already been obeyed by everyone present, stopped in front of Joseph, and placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. He said something Volkson could not hear. Joseph nodded once. Then the boy stepped forward and Archuleta held him. Only then did Volkson look away. The captured Kehlar refused to speak during the initial field questioning. That did not matter as much as some of the humans thought it did. Volkson examined the weapons, armor, comms, and the encrypted routing wafer recovered from the second wave team. None of it carried Thrihiel's name. It did not need to. The procurement pattern, the cutout routing, the timing, the preference for Kehlar contractors operating without official clan insignia, all of it carried the shape of the same mind. The attack had been coordinated with Aelari Prime. Hansen was in the Aelari Prime system, beyond real-time contact. The cipher map had opened. Joseph had seen it. Therefore, Joseph had become once again an objective. Volkson made his formal report from a secure room beneath the Academy Administration building. He gave the facts. He gave the equipment assessment. He gave his conclusion with no rhetorical excess. This was Thrihiel's operation. The naval intelligence commander across from him said, "You are certain?" "No," Volkson said. "Certainty is for mathematics and fools. I am sufficiently convinced to act as though it is true." The commander accepted that. Archuleta took Joseph home before midday. Volkson did not follow immediately. He submitted his report, allowed medical personnel to seal the cuts on his cheek and examine his ribs, refused a sedative, and secured permission to review the interrogation feed from the captured Kehlar. The prisoner said nothing, not a word. He only watched the room with the contemptuous patience of a professional who knew silence was sometimes the last useful service he could provide. By late afternoon, Volkson went to Archuleta's apartment. The Admiral opened the door himself. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Archuleta stepped aside. Joseph was on the couch with a blanket around his shoulders and a cup of tea held untouched in both hands. He looked smaller than he had in the lab, younger, not because fear had diminished him, but because the adults around him had finally stopped asking him to be useful. His eyes lifted when Vrolksen entered. "Are you hurt?" Joseph asked. Vrolksen had not expected that to be the first question. "Not significantly." Joseph nodded, as if filing the answer among other things he could manage. Vrolksen did not approach him. He did not ask whether Joseph wished to talk. He did not offer comfort in the human forms that belonged to Archuleta and would have seemed false from him. He crossed to the corner chair near the window and sat. Archuleta returned to the kitchen, where water was heating. The apartment remained quiet. For several hours, Vrolksen stayed there. Sometimes Archuleta spoke to Joseph softly. Sometimes Joseph answered. Sometimes neither of them said anything. The room moved through afternoon and toward evening. Light changed on the windows. The cup in Joseph's hands was replaced once, then again. He drank a little the second time. Vrolksen remained in the corner. His presence made no demands. That was intentional. The boy had been chased, trapped, and nearly taken because others had decided what he was worth. Vrolksen would not add another claim to the day. He would not ask for gratitude. He would not explain that he had killed for him. He would not make the boy carry the emotional weight of being protected. Protection was not a speech. It was a fact. Eventually, Joseph fell asleep on the couch, still wrapped in the blanket. Archuleta covered him more carefully and stood there for a moment with one hand resting on the back of the couch. Only then did Vrolksen rise. Archuleta walked him to the door. "Thank you," the Admiral said. Vrolksen inclined his head. "He is under Concord protection." "That is not what I meant." "I know." The two men looked at each other. Different species, different offices, same understanding. Vrolksen left without saying goodbye to Joseph. The boy did not need another voice. Not tonight. He needed the door locked, the lights low, Archuleta nearby, and the knowledge that someone would sit in the corner if sitting in the corner was what protection required. 22. Procession. The Aelari emerged from the jungle as if the world had decided to give its own answer. There were 11 of them. I counted because counting was something to do with fear besides letting it drive. 11 figures moving through the green edge of the clearing, with the controlled caution of people who knew the jungle well enough not to hurry inside it. Small by human standards, each one standing somewhere near 4 feet, though the way they carried themselves made the measurement feel irrelevant. They were not children. They were not fragile. They were adults of their world, armed with the authority their world understood. Their clothing was mixed. That was the first thing I noticed after the count. Not a single uniform. Not a hunting party exactly. Not a religious procession exactly. Robes and practical gear together. Dyed cloth in pale silver blue and green, travel-worn at the hems. Leather or plant fiber belts. Small pouches. Bone or bronze ornaments. 2 carried short spears. 3 held simple staffs carved with crescent shapes and vine patterns. The rest carried knives or tools, none raised, all visible. The lead Aelari was a woman. I knew that before the translator did, from posture rather than biology. She moved with the certainty of someone accustomed to being followed. Her robe was lighter than the others, moon-pale beneath a green traveling cloak. A crescent emblem hung at her throat, carved from shell or polished bone. Fine white markings traced her brow and cheeks in a pattern that looked ceremonial rather than decorative. Behind me, Kimov did not move. That was how I knew the Marines had read the moment correctly. Chen and Russo were somewhere to either side, still enough that their stillness became part of the clearing. No rifles, no visible armor, no threat display. Only 3 dangerous men trying very hard not to look like dangerous men. Nora stood beside me. I did not look at her. I did not need to. I could feel the same recognition landing in her at almost the exact moment it landed in me. The Aelari stopped at the clearing's edge. For several seconds no one spoke. The jungle filled the silence. Insects, or the local equivalent, buzzed in layered waves. Something called from the canopy, high and fluting. Leaves shifted in the warm wind left behind by Bishop's departure. The smell of disturbed vegetation and shuttle exhaust still hung in the clearing, thinning fast but not fast enough. The Aelari looked at the sky. Then they looked at us. I had ordered Bishop away because the shuttle could not be seen. I realized then that the shuttle had not needed to be present for the story to begin. The broken branches, the hot air, the flattened grass, the 6 tall strangers standing in a clearing where no tall strangers belonged. The evidence was enough. Maybe more than enough. A miracle with the mechanism removed was still a miracle to anyone who already knew what it meant. The lead Aelari stepped forward, 1 pace, 2, then she knelt, not cautiously, not in fear. In recognition, the other 10 followed her down, all 11 kneeling at the edge of the clearing, heads bowed toward us. I felt Nara go very still. Half a step behind us, Marsh drew 1 careful breath through her injuries. I heard it because every other sound had suddenly moved very far away. The lead Aelari raised her face. She spoke. The words reached my ear first as sound, liquid consonants, a falling cadence, a rhythm that seemed built for recitation. The translator hesitated. Bassie's language package caught, sorted, failed once, then reassembled itself around the regional temple dialect. The voice in my ear arrived half a second late. Sun and moon, return to us. The prophecies are fulfilled. There it was, no ambiguity, no useful delay, no little gap where I could say actually there has been a misunderstanding, and watch the problem politely correct itself. The prophecies are fulfilled. I stood very still. That was the only intelligent thing left to do in the first second after a civilization decided you were part of its sacred history. Every impulse I had as a coalition officer wanted to reject it immediately, to say no, to deny, to correct, to explain that we were human, that we had come from a ship in orbit, that their world was one world among many, that the sky was not heaven and the moon was not watching them with divine intent. Every impulse I had as a warden told me that would be violence, not physical violence, maybe not visible violence. But it would strike at the organizing center of their world in the first breath of contact. A denial from inside their own prophecy might not free them from it. Bassie had warned us. Marsh had warned us. Refusal might be read as humility, concealment, test, taboo, or judgment. Or it might simply shatter the authority of the woman kneeling in front of us and start a theological crisis in a jungle clearing, while Thrihiel moved somewhere ahead of us. No doctrine manual had a paragraph for that exact disaster. Nara's hand shifted slightly at her side. Not reaching for me, not visibly, just a fractional movement, the body wanting contact and discipline forbidding it. I understood. Marsh whispered behind us, barely audible. "Captain!" "I know," I said, just as quietly. The lead Aelari remained kneeling. The translator, now warmed to the dialect, caught the next words more cleanly. "I am Solari, High Priestess of Solunara at Evenal, Keeper of the Night Rites, Servant of the Moon's Living Heart." Solari, High Priestess, of course. Because if a planet was going to hand you a non-interference crisis, it might as well send someone with enough authority to make every wrong word permanent. She lowered her head again, but not fully. She was still looking at us, eyes wide and dark, not with simple fear. Fear was there, probably. Awe was there, too. But beneath both was calculation of the religious kind. Not manipulation, but interpretation. She was trying to understand how the world she knew had changed while remaining the world she knew. "Great Aurelian," she said, and the translator's voice in my ear felt suddenly too intimate. "Lady Silonara, we have kept the roads. We have guarded the terraces. We have sung beneath the dark. We knew the wolf would come before the closing of the season. We did not know the sky would answer so soon." The wolf. Thrihiel had arrived before us then, or word of him had. Nara's face changed by less than anyone else would have noticed. The name Silonara had hit her. Not as vanity, not as temptation, as burden. I finally looked at her. She looked back. There was no confusion in her eyes, no plea for me to fix it with one clever captain's sentence. She had reached the same conclusion I had. There was nothing we could say right now that would undo this without making it worse. Kehlar spoke from behind me, low enough that the Aelari could not hear. "Captain?" "Hold," I said. "I am holding." His voice was calm. So were Chen and Russo behind him. The problem was that the Aelari were reading them too. I could see it in the way two of the kneeling scouts glanced past Marsh toward the Marines and then lowered their eyes again. Not soldiers. Honor guard. Servants of the divine pair. Spear-bearers. Stormmen. Whatever category their culture had waiting for armed attendants of gods, Kehlar and his two Marines had just been placed inside it. The universe was thorough when it wanted to be cruel. I took one step forward. Nara moved with me. Not behind me, beside me. That mattered. I did not know exactly how, but I knew it mattered. If their divine framework was married pair, day and night, sun and moon, then presenting myself as command alone would be another kind of distortion, not a better one. The Aelari lowered their heads again. I stopped before we got too close. Bassie's contact guidance moved through my memory in pieces. Avoid declarations. Accept hospitality only when refusal would cause harm. Use peace, healing, protection. No prophecies. No theatrical displays. Do not confirm divinity. Do not destroy their world in the first sentence. The translator could give me words. It could not give me wisdom. "We come in a time of danger," I said. The in-ear unit caught my English and converted it into Aelari. I heard the spoken output through the small directional emitter hidden near my collar, pitched low enough to sound like my voice belonged to me. Solari's eyes lifted. I continued carefully. "We seek the one who has crossed your boundaries. We do not come to harm your people." The translator hesitated over boundaries, chose a word that made Solari's expression sharpen, and then settled. "Good or bad? Hard to tell." Aelari bowed deeper. "The wolf has worn the edge mask and spoken at closed doors. He seeks the heart beneath the moon. We sent runners. We lit the watchfires. We prayed that the day and night would not turn their faces away." Marsh whispered, "Valeth framework." I figured. Aelari looked toward Marsh at the sound. For the first time, uncertainty crossed her face. Marsh was neither part of the divine pair, nor one of the apparent honor guard. Wounded, pale, smaller than Kehlar, but still tall by Aelari standards. A scholar? Servant? Witness? The Aelari would sort her into something soon enough. I needed to move the conversation before they did it badly. "You are Aelari of Avenel," I said. "Yes, great one. I hated that." I kept my face still. "Your village is near?" "Half a day east if the paths are merciful." "Half a day by Aelari travel. Longer for Marsh, maybe shorter for human stride if we were not trying to avoid trampling sacred plants, terrifying locals, or dying of humidity." "We need to understand what has happened," I said. "We need to know where the wolf is gone." Aelari rose only after a visible internal decision. The other 10 remained kneeling until she made a small gesture with her staff. Then they stood as one. She was still much shorter than I was. Standing brought the top of her head only to the lower part of my chest. The difference made the kneeling worse in retrospect. None of this was harmless. Physical scale had theological consequences too. We were too tall for their world. The wolf servants came by the western smoke road, she said. Not many. Enough. They asked for the hall. They asked with metal and threat. One of the road keepers fled to us. We came to see what sign the night would give. And instead found us, Nara said. It was the first thing she had said. The translator rendered her voice into Aelari, and every Aelari in the clearing reacted. Not dramatically. No cries, no collapsing prostrations. But the reaction moved through them like wind through leaves. Heads lowered. Hands tightened on staffs. One of the younger scouts touched his forehead to the ground before Aelari stopped him with a sharp whisper. Nara had spoken, and the moon had acquired a voice. Her expression did not change, but I saw the cost. Aelari looked at her with something close to pain. "Lady," she said, "we have kept your water. We have not let the root fires die." Nara took one slow breath. I knew what she wanted to say. "I am not your lady. I am a doctor. I am Nara Himura from Osaka, and I am trying very hard not to ruin your civilization by standing in the wrong clearing." Instead, she said, "Then you have cared for what was entrusted to you." Marsh made the smallest sound behind us. Not alarm. Recognition. The sentence had landed. Aelari's eyes filled. Not crying. Not exactly. Aelari biology might have different signs for that. But the emotional shape was unmistakable. "We tried," Aelari said. "There are moments when command is less about choosing the correct option than accepting that all available options have already been contaminated by events before you arrived. This was one." I looked at the tree line, at the 11 Aelari at my landing party. Kemov's jaw was set. Chen's eyes moved constantly over the flanks. Russo was silent, which on any other day I would have taken as evidence of divine intervention by itself. Marsh looked like a scientist watching her field notes become a living disaster. Nara stood beside me, steady and furious at the universe. I had two choices. Refuse Aelari's escort, vanish into the jungle, and turn ourselves into wandering omens while Thrihiel moved ahead of us with a better local guide or a stolen one. Or accept the escort and enter the culture through the person most likely to understand what Thrihiel's presence meant. There was no clean path, only the less stupid one. "We will go with you to Avenel," I said. Aelari bowed her head. "The village will receive you," she said. "The children will sing, the elders will open the moon house, the roads will be cleared." "That may not be wise," I said. The translator worked. Aelari heard me. She did not misunderstand. I was something. "No," she said, "it is not wise." That surprised me. She looked toward the sky where the shuttle had vanished, then toward Nara, then back to me. "But the prophecies were never promises of wisdom," Aelari said, "only of need." For a second I saw past the priestess and the robes and the prophecy. I saw a leader who had been handed an impossible situation and had chosen the least terrible path her framework allowed. I recognized that more than I wanted to. "Then lead," I said. Aelari stepped aside and gestured toward the jungle path to the east. The Aelari party rearranged itself with practiced efficiency. 2 scouts forward, 3 along the flanks. Aelari near the front, but close enough to us to speak. The remaining attendants behind, leaving space for our people in the center. Not prisoners. Not guests exactly. A procession. Of course it was a procession. Kemov moved closer to me as we began walking. "Captain," he murmured, "this is bad." "Yes." "Manageable?" I looked at Aelari's back, then at Nara, then at the jungle closing around us. "No idea." He considered that. Honest answer, he said. Don't get used to it. The path swallowed the clearing behind us. Heat closed in. Leaves brushed my sleeves. Somewhere overhead, something bright-winged flashed between branches and disappeared. The Aelari moved with quiet confidence, every step known, every pause meaningful. We followed them into a world that had already named us. Behind us, the shuttle was gone. Above us, Singapore would be out of line of sight until night. Ahead of us, half a day east, a village called Evenal waited to receive the sun and moon. And somewhere beyond that, Thrihiel was walking toward the hall of the moon's heart with stolen data, borrowed theology, and a head start. I had accepted Solari's escort because there was no better choice. I wondered how many disasters in history had begun with that exact sentence. 23 after. By late evening, Joseph had stopped shaking. That did not mean he was all right. Stephen Archuleta had commanded ships, stations, task groups, and enough officers to know the difference between a body recovering and a person returning. Joseph sat on the couch in the apartment's main room with a blanket around his shoulders and a cup of tea held in both hands. He had drunk half of it. The rest had gone cold. The boy had answered every medical question correctly. Name, age, location, date, injury check, no balium dizziness, no hearing loss, no visible bleeding, no signs of concussion. He had obeyed the corpsman, followed instructions, and endured the security debrief with the same careful seriousness he brought to everything. Then he had gone quiet. Archuleta had not pushed. The apartment was no longer simply an apartment. Coalition Navy security personnel held the hallway, the lift lobby, the service entrance, the roof access, and the exterior vehicle lane below. 2 plainclothes naval intelligence officers occupied the empty unit across the hall. A Marine fire team had been placed downstairs with orders that would make any unauthorized approach deeply educational. Archuleta had been scheduled to brief senior staff at 1600. He had canceled it. Technically, he had delegated it to Rear Admiral Okonkwo with a secure packet and a note that said, "Handle the room. I am unavailable." No one had questioned him. Vrolksen had been present at the apartment for several hours after the attack, seated in the corner chair near the window, saying almost nothing and making no demand on Joseph's attention. Then, shortly before dinner, he had left. That had been the right thing, too. Vrolksen understood boundaries in a way Archuleta had come to respect. The Children Warden had remained long enough to become a protective fact. Then he had removed himself before his presence became another thing Joseph had to process. Now the corner chair was empty. Joseph kept looking at it anyway. Archuleta noticed and said nothing. The boy looked toward the window. Houston's towers reflected against the dark glass, making it difficult to tell where the city ended and the apartment began. "Were they trying to kill me?" Joseph asked. Archuleta sat in the chair across from him. "No." Joseph's eyes moved to him. Archuleta kept his voice even. He had lied to politicians, enemies, and once to an entire press pool for 12 hours because operational security required it. He would not lie to Joseph. "They were trying to take you." Joseph absorbed that. The cup shifted slightly in his hands. Tea moved against the ceramic. Because of the cipher. "Yes." "And because of the map." "Yes." Archuleta leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Joseph, people tried to kidnap you today because of what you are becoming." The boy flinched more at becoming than at kidnap. Archuleta noticed and hated that he had been right to use the word. "I do not mean you are becoming a thing," he said. "I do not mean a weapon or a key or any of the other language careless people use when they are frightened by what they do not understand. I mean you are becoming someone who can see parts of this problem that others cannot. You helped Fevai identify the map. You understood Eden and Aelari Prime before some of the analysts did. That makes you important. I was already important before, Joseph said. It was not defiance, it was correction. Archuleta felt something in his chest tighten. Yes, he said, you were. Joseph looked down into the tea. But now dangerous people know it. Yes. The silence that followed belonged to both of them. Joseph's voice, when it came again, was smaller. Captain Hansen is too far away. Archuleta nodded slowly. Yes. How far? Several light years, at Aelari Prime. Joseph looked up. So he cannot know. Not immediately. But he needs to. He will. Joseph waited. Archuleta had learned that Joseph did not fill silence just because an adult expected him to. Abraham Thompson had raised a boy who could sit with quiet until the other person either told the truth or revealed they were avoiding it. I ordered a stealth courier drone launched to the Aelari Prime system, Archuleta said. Highest priority, Warden channel encryption. It contains the report on today's attack, Vrolkson's assessment, and our conclusion that Thrihiel coordinated the operation with Hansen's descent. Joseph's grip tightened around the cup. When will it reach him? Soon enough for him to know. Not soon enough for me to like it. That answer was not precise. It was the most honest one available. Joseph nodded once. Hansen is on the planet already? Likely. Based on Singapore's last status drone, yes. Joseph looked back toward the window. Then he has enough to think about. He does. I hate that. So do I. The answer surprised him. Archuleta saw it. Adults around Joseph had a habit of explaining pain into smaller pieces. Archuleta had done it himself. It was sometimes necessary. But there were moments when a boy did not need smaller pieces. He needed to know the adult saw the size of the thing. Joseph set the cup on the low table with great care. Can I skip school tomorrow? Archuleta almost smiled, almost. Yes. Joseph looked faintly relieved, then immediately guilty. But I still want to go to the lab. I thought you might. Is that allowed? Tomorrow, yes. Under heavier escort. Joseph's mouth tightened. More Marines. Yes? Plain clothes? Some? Not all? No. He accepted that more easily than Archuleta expected. Maybe because after today, visible protection no longer felt theoretical. I don't want them to stop me from working, Joseph said. They won't. If I stay home, then they change what I do. Archuleta considered the right answer and found there was not one. They already changed some things, he said, but they do not get to decide all of them. Joseph looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. That was enough. The rest of the evening moved slowly. Archuleta reheated food Joseph barely touched. He replaced the tea. He answered one secure message, then put the comm aside again. Joseph glanced once more toward the empty corner chair, then looked away. At 2100, Joseph finally began to fade. He did not announce it. His eyes stayed too long on the same point. His shoulders softened under the blanket. The muscles in his hands unclenched one by one. Archuleta stood. Bed! Joseph blinked as if the word had come from far away. I'm not tired. Of course not. I'm not. Then humor an old admiral. Joseph did, mostly because exhaustion had made argument impractical. Archuleta walked him to his room. The desk drawer was closed. Archuleta knew the letter from Abraham was inside. He had seen Joseph open the drawer once after they returned, touch the handle, and close it again without taking the letter out. Joseph sat on the edge of the bed. Steve? Yes? Vrolkson killed people today. Archuleta did not move. Yes, for me. Yes? Joseph looked toward the open bedroom door, beyond it to the living room where the children warden had sat for hours without asking anything from him. I don't know what to say to him. You do not have to say anything tonight. But later. Later you can say whatever is true. Joseph thought about that. Then he lay down. Sleep took him faster than he expected. One moment he was awake, face turned toward the window. The next his breathing had deepened, and the day finally let go of him. Archuleta stood beside the bed for another minute. He had no children of his own. He had commanded thousands. He had written casualty letters. He had sat with young officers after battle and told them grief did not disqualify them from duty. None of that had prepared him for the particular helplessness of watching a 14-year-old become important enough for enemies. He turned off the light and left the door half open. Then he went to his office. The office was small by headquarters standards, but it had what mattered: a hardline secure terminal, an independent encryption suite, and enough acoustic isolation that the apartment outside might as well have been on another planet. Archuleta closed the door and activated the privacy field. The glass wall facing the city went opaque. The room's communications system shifted to full compartmented encryption. He entered his command authorization. Then Volkson's Warden channel. The connection took 6 seconds. Volkson appeared on the display from his Houston quarters, seated beneath dim light, one side of his face marked by a fresh medical sealant strip where shrapnel or pavement had opened the skin. He looked tired in the precise way children's looked tired, not slumped, not diminished, simply more still than before. "Admiral," Volkson said. "Warden." A beat passed. "Joseph is asleep," Archuleta said. "Good." There was no sentiment in the word. There was feeling beneath it anyway. Archuleta brought up the shared file. Weapons photographs, armor tags, biometric scans, routing fragments, and the single surviving Kehlar's blank interrogation posture filled the side display. They were Thrihiel's. Volkson's eyes moved across the data. Yes, no hesitation, no useful hesitation. Archuleta highlighted the recovered routing wafer. "The commander says the chain is deniable." "The commander is correct. Deniable does not mean ambiguous. What do you see?" "Procurement through 3 cutouts associated with former Kehlar irregular supply channels. Modified coalition-compatible comm gear. Suppression charges appropriate for disabling armored civilian vehicles, not assassinating occupants. Sedation cuffs. Extraction harness scaled for a human adolescent." Volkson paused. "They came to take him alive." Archuleta looked at the harness image and felt a cold, disciplined fury settle behind his ribs. "Coordinated with Aelari Prime." "Yes?" "Because Hansen is out of reach." "Because Hansen is out of reach, you are divided. Fevai is exposed, and Joseph's movement schedule was predictable." Volkson's mouth tightened. Thrihiel knew when to strike to maximize disruption. Archuleta leaned on the desk. He knew Hansen would be descending. He likely inferred it from the timing of Singapore's arrival and the Aelari Prime operation. If his ground team confirmed movement near the node, he would expect Hansen to act personally, which pulls Hansen away from Joseph. Yes, and an attack here pulls us away from the lab, the map, and the political handling. Yes. Archuleta exhaled through his nose. A battlefield was easier when it admitted it was a battlefield. Thrihiel kept making every place one at once. A jungle temple, a Houston street, a laboratory, a wounded observation post, a boy's drive to school. What does the prisoner know? Enough to confirm operational structure, not enough to compromise Thrihiel directly. You sound certain. He was selected to survive capture if necessary. Archuleta looked at him. Volkson continued. The other 2 in my engagement fought to kill or die. The third maneuvered like one preserving himself for questioning. That does not make him cooperative. It makes him useful to his employer in custody. To tell us what Thrihiel wants us to hear. Or to tell us nothing while ensuring we waste time discovering the nothing? Archuleta closed his eyes briefly. Damn him. Yes, Volkson said. From Volkson the word carried surprising weight. Archuleta opened his eyes. Joseph wants to go to the lab tomorrow. I expected that. I said yes. That was correct. Security will be visible. That is also correct. He is 14. Yes, the answer was not cold. That made it worse. Archuleta turned off the image of the extraction harness. I sent the stealth courier to Singapore. I saw the launch authorization. Hansen will know soon. Soon enough to adjust, Volkson said. Not soon enough to prevent whatever has already begun. Archuleta looked toward the office door. Beyond it, Joseph slept. For tonight, that had to be victory. A partial one. A temporary one. The only kind the day had offered. Will you be at the lab tomorrow? Archuleta asked. Yes. Officially? Officially, I will observe the cipher investigation as Concord Warden representative. And unofficially? Volkson was silent for a moment. Then he said, Unofficially, I will sit where I can see the door. Archuleta nodded. Thank you. Volkson inclined his head. He is under Concord protection. That is not what I meant. I know. Different species, different offices, same understanding. The call ended. Archuleta sat alone in the darkened office for several seconds after the display went blank. Outside the room, the apartment was quiet. Security personnel held the perimeter. Houston moved beyond the opaque glass. Joseph slept with his father's letter in the desk drawer, and a war he had never asked for turning around him. Archuleta turned off the privacy field and left the office door open. Then he sat in the living room, facing the hallway to Joseph's room. For the moment, protection was silence, locked doors, and remaining awake while the boy slept. 24, watching. Hernandez reviewed the same status report for the fourth time and found nothing new in it. That was not surprising. Reports rarely changed because an officer disliked what they said. Singapore held her parking orbit on the night side of Aelari Prime, tucked always inside the planet's shadow from its sun, moving where the atmosphere glow and the curvature of the world gave them concealment without making them blind. It was an elegant solution on paper. In practice, it meant the ship lived inside a narrow lane of acceptable risk, adjusting constantly, never quite where Hernandez wanted her to be, never quite exposed enough to be seen. The bridge had the orbit. Hernandez had the ship. Late-night shipboard time made Deck 2 quieter than usual. The mess was dim to watch cycle lighting, warm enough to keep it from feeling abandoned, but low enough that everyone aboard understood the ship was pretending to sleep. Beyond the mess bulkheads, environmental systems hummed softly. Somewhere below them, Deck 3 engineering was doing whatever engineering did when Varos was not personally glaring at it. Deck 4 held the shuttles, the cargo bay, and a newly fabricated holding cell Hernandez hoped they would need, and feared they would not be able to use. She sat alone at one of the mess tables with her tablet propped before her, reviewing ship status, orbital geometry, and the surface operations summary Bishop had filed after returning with Shuttle 1. Landing party on surface. Shuttle recovered. Primary camp gear not deployed. Local contact likely. That final line was Bishop's phrasing, which meant she was avoiding a stronger statement because she had not personally seen the Aelari kneel. Bishop did not write certainty into reports she had not earned. But Hernandez could read the shape of the thing. The landing party had touched down. The shuttle had been forced to lift before they could unload the bulk of the nondescript camp equipment. Hansen, Himura, Marsh, Kimov, Chen, and Russo were now on the surface with civilian clothing, concealed sidearms, limited communicators, passive in-ear translators, Himura's repacked medical kit, and whatever supplies they could carry on their bodies. They were also likely in contact with a Bronze Age civilization that had been primed by its own religious framework to receive them as a divine married pair descending from the sky. Hernandez tapped the tablet once and closed the report. She did not need to read it again. Across the mess, the lift doors opened. Bishop came in first, hair damp from a quick shower, uniform jacket open over her duty shirt, and fatigue finally showing in the way she moved. Varos followed half a step behind her, carrying a toolkit he had absolutely no reason to bring to the mess unless he considered it a personal comfort object. Hernandez looked at him. "Lieutenant Varos." He stopped. "Commander, is that toolkit necessary?" "No." A pause. "Is it clean?" "Yes." "Then I will pretend I did not ask." Bishop grinned. "That's basically permission." "It is not," Hernandez said. "It sounded like permission." "It sounded like fatigue." "That too." Gibby was not present, but his influence occupied the galley. 2 covered plates sat in the warmer with handwritten labels. Bishop, EAT, before arguing with gravity again. Varos, British food, engineering structure questionable. A 3rd note was attached to the dessert container. Eaten mess. Strawberries from Aloha. Do not let Russo find this. Bishop opened the warmer and stared. "Oh, he made bangers and mash." Varos looked over her shoulder. "That means sausage and mashed root vegetable." "Potato. Yes, root vegetable. There's corn. Corn is not traditional." "No," Bishop said. "But Gibby hates mushy peas on moral grounds." Hernandez looked back down at her tablet to spite herself. "He has expressed that opinion before." "Loudly," Bishop said. "At length. With gestures." Varos removed his plate carefully. "What is the dessert?" Bishop lifted the clear container. "Eaten mess, meringue, cream, strawberries. British dessert. Gibby's note says the strawberries are fresh from Aloha and were kept in stasis, so if we don't appreciate them properly, he'll haunt us." "Gibby is not dead." "He'd find a way." Varos seemed to consider that plausible. They took the table 2 seats down from Hernandez. Bishop set her tablet between them and propped it against a napkin dispenser. Varos examined the bangers and mash with the wary curiosity of a man evaluating an unfamiliar docking interface. Hernandez returned to her status reports. She lasted 40 seconds. On Bishop's tablet, a black and white aircraft sat on a field under a gray old sky. The documentary's narrator spoke in the polished tone of historical retrospectives everywhere, describing a young American pilot, a dangerous prize, and a flight that had begun in New York and ended in Paris. Hernandez looked up to spite herself. Bishop noticed. "You can join us, Commander. It's educational. I am reviewing surface support contingencies." "This is a surface support contingency." Hernandez raised an eyebrow. "Historical morale support." "That is not a category." "It should be." Varos pointed at the aircraft on the screen with his fork. "This craft is called the Spirit of St. Louis." "Yep," Bishop said, "because the flight was funded by prominent citizens from St. Louis, Missouri. They backed Lindbergh when other people thought flying nonstop from New York to Paris was insane." "Was it insane?" Bishop cut into her sausage. "By the standards of the time, arguably. By pilot standards, ambitious." "Those are not the same." "No, but pilots spend a lot of time pretending they are." Hernandez tried not to be interested. Failed. She moved 1 chair closer, still holding the tablet as if that preserved the fiction that she was working. The documentary cut to old photographs of Charles Lindbergh standing beside the Spirit of St. Louis, long and lean and young, in the way early aviation photographs made everyone look both brave and doomed. "There was a prize?" Varos asked. $25,000, Bishop said. "The Orteig Prize? First non-stop flight from New York to Paris? Lindbergh wasn't the first to attempt it. Several people tried. Some died." Varos absorbed that. Humans created a financial incentive to cross an ocean in an underdeveloped aircraft. That is one way to describe early aviation. Was there a safer method of crossing? Ships. And he chose this. He wanted to fly. Varos considered the screen. That explanation is emotionally complete but technically inadequate. Bishop smiled. "You're getting humanity." The documentary shifted to the aircraft's design. Schematics appeared. High wing, single engine, fuel tanks placed forward. No front windshield because the main tank blocked the pilot's forward view. Varos leaned closer. "That is alarming, right?" Bishop said. The plane was specifically designed to be lightweight and maximize fuel. Everything was about range. It carried a ridiculous amount of fuel for its size. He could not see forward. He had a periscope, side windows, and pilot judgment. That is worse. It worked. Survival does not validate design. Bishop pointed her fork at him. "You and Varos Prime can argue with history after dessert. There is no Varos Prime. There should be." Hernandez found herself watching the aircraft instead of her status reports. The Spirit of St. Louis looked impossibly fragile. Fabric, wire, struts, engine, fuel, and one man's decision to trust all of it over an ocean. It had none of the redundancies Hernandez considered the minimum threshold for responsible command. No modern navigation, no comm network, no autopilot worthy of the word, no rescue shuttle, no orbital overwatch, not even a parachute, Bishop explained. "He didn't take one," she said. "Wait. He stripped everything he could. No radio either. Again, wait, not much gear at all." Varos frowned. "No parachute, no radio. Limited forward visibility, severe fuel load. This is a cautionary documentary." "It's a triumph documentary." Humans categorize strangely. "He did have sandwiches," Bishop said. Varos turned to look at her. "What?" "He took a bag of sandwiches." "That was his survival system?" "Part of it." "I object." "So would Gibby, but Lindbergh made it." The documentary showed the route across the Atlantic. Bishop lowered her voice slightly. Not out of reverence exactly, but because pilots recognized certain kinds of loneliness, even when separated by centuries. He hadn't slept the night before. Too much preparation. Too much pressure. He took off from Roosevelt Field already exhausted. Then he fought sleep deprivation the whole way across. Hours and hours over water. Fog, darkness, weather. No one to hand controls to. Just him and the airplane. Hernandez looked at Bishop then. Bishop was still watching the screen, but something in her expression had shifted. The irreverence remained. It always did. But under it was the part of Amanda Bishop that understood what it meant to place both hands on controls and become the narrow line between physics and death. 33.5 hours, Bishop said. New York to Paris. When he landed at Le Bourget, the crowd nearly swallowed the airplane. His life changed forever. Varos looked at the frozen image of the crowd surrounding the Spirit of St. Louis. One flight, Bishop said. That seems disproportionate. It was more than a flight. It changed what people believed distance meant. Hernandez's tablet dimmed in her hand. She thought of Hansen on the surface below, walking into a civilization that had no concept of spaceflight as engineering. To the Aelari, the descent from the sky would not change what distance meant. It would change what divinity meant. Lindbergh had crossed an ocean and landed in history. Hansen and Imura had crossed atmosphere and possibly landed in scripture. Bishop took a bite of the eaten mess and closed her eyes. "Oh, that's good." Varos sampled his with suspicion. His expression shifted. "The structure has intentionally failed. That's why it's called mess? It is a dessert based on collapse? Controlled collapse? Like some shuttle approaches." Bishop opened one eye. "Careful." Hernandez stood and retrieved a cup of tea from the galley dispenser. She did not ask for dessert. Bishop pushed the container toward her anyway. "Commander, I am not hungry. It has aloha strawberries." Hernandez looked at the container, then took a spoon. That made Bishop smile, but she wisely said nothing. For several minutes, the three of them watched the documentary in the low light of the mess while Singapore moved through the shadow of Aelari Prime. The ship was quiet around them, but it was not sleeping. Bridge watches monitored the moon. Science watched for launch signatures. Engineering held the thermal profile inside limits. Deck 4 kept the shuttle ready. Medical tracked the landing party's next communication window as if 10 minutes of line of sight could be stretched by wanting it badly enough. Hernandez ate one spoonful of eaten mess, then another. The dessert was absurdly good. Gibby would know. That was annoying. On the tablet, the crowd in Paris surged toward the airplane. The narrator spoke about fame, aviation, and the strange way a single arrival could become a symbol larger than the person who made it. Bishop paused the documentary there. The image froze on Lindbergh's aircraft, surrounded by people reaching to touch history. No one spoke for a moment. Then Varos said, "Captain Hansen would dislike this comparison." "Yes," Hernandez said. Bishop looked at her. "Which part?" "The part where landing changes everything." Bishop's expression sobered. Below them, hidden by darkness, Hansen, Himura, Marsh, Kimov, Chen, and Russo were somewhere under jungle canopy with no camp gear, limited communications, and a local population almost certainly trying to understand them through prophecy. Hernandez looked toward the nearest viewport. Though from the mess there was nothing to see but reflected light and the faint suggestion of the planet's shadow. She had the ship. That was the order. Hold the orbit. Watch the moon. Watch for launch activity. Protect the landing party when the geometry allowed and trust them when it did not. Command, she was learning again, was not always movement. Sometimes command was staying exactly where ordered while everyone you wanted to protect moved beyond your reach. Bishop restarted the documentary. Varos returned to his bangers and mash. "The sausage is structurally sound." "Gibby will treasure that review," Bishop said. "The corn is acceptable." High praise for corn. "The dessert remains intentionally collapsed." "And?" Varos took another careful bite. "I approve of the collapse." Bishop grinned. Hernandez allowed herself one more spoonful of eaten mess and reopened the status report on her tablet. Still nothing new. No launch activity from the surface. No movement from the cargo handler on the far side of the moon. No communication window yet. The same report as before. The same orbit. The same dark planet beneath them. Hernandez read it again anyway. 25, what they saw. The Aelari moved through the jungle faster than I expected. That was the first practical correction the planet forced on me. I had assumed their size would slow them. It did not. If anything, it made them better suited to the terrain. They slipped beneath low branches without ducking, stepped over root systems that forced the rest of us to watch our footing, and followed paths I would not have recognized as paths if Solari's party had not treated them as obvious. Within the first 10 minutes, I stopped thinking of them as small. They were Aelari. This was their world. We were the ones moving badly through it. Heat gathered under the canopy and stayed there. The air was dense enough to drink, full of damp earth, broad leaves, flowers, rot, and the sharp resin scent of cut vines. Insects clicked and whined from every direction. Somewhere above us, something with a long throat called across the treetops and received 3 answers from farther away. Kehlar walked behind Marsh for the first stretch with Chen, and Russo spread wide enough to cover our flanks, but not so wide that they vanished into the foliage. After perhaps half a kilometer, he moved closer to me. "Captain," he said quietly. I glanced at him. His eyes remained on the Aelari ahead. "We should march openly. We are already fairly visible." "Not what I mean." I understood him before he finished. The Aelari had placed us in the center of the procession, with Solari slightly ahead and her attendants moving in a loose, protective pattern around us. Kehlar, Chen, and Russo had been trying to behave like security without looking like security. It was a good instinct by human military standards. It was also probably wrong here. "You think hiding the Marines looks worse," I said. "Yes. They read us as attendants or guards. If we pretend not to be guards, we create uncertainty. If we behave like an honor guard, it confirms the structure they already expect." I did not love that. It was still a clean red. "Do it." Kehlar nodded once. He signaled Chen and Russo with 2 small hand motions. The formation shifted. Not much. "Enough." They closed in behind us and took positions that made them visibly part of our party rather than quiet predators at the edge of it. No weapons drawn, no threat posture, just 3 men moving with controlled discipline, hands free, eyes active. The Aelari accepted it without question. Of course they did. A divine pair descending from the sky would have attendants. Guards, spear-bearers. Whatever word their translator would eventually choose for the category, they had room for it. Kehlar had not changed their story. He had made us fit more cleanly inside it. That should have reassured me. It did not. Solari glanced back once, saw the adjusted formation, and made a small gesture with her staff. 2 of her own people moved aside, giving Kehlar's group clearer space behind us. "Accepted," Kehlar said under his breath. "Wonderful," I said. "Useful." "Also awful." "Yes." Nara walked at my side. She had tied her hair back and kept one hand near the strap of the plain medical satchel. Marsh walked half a step behind her, breathing carefully but keeping pace. Every 10 minutes, Nara checked her without making it obvious. Every time, Marsh pretended not to notice. "You are doing too much," Nara said at one point. Marsh did not look at her. "I am walking." "You are walking while febrile after infection and evacuation from a damaged orbital station." That is a longer way to say walking. It is a more medically accurate way. Marsh almost smiled. "I will collapse politely if necessary." "You will not collapse at all. Then we share a goal." Nara gave her a look that had ended arguments in sickbay across 2 ships and at least 1 planet. Marsh kept walking. The Aelari path widened as we moved east. Not by human standards. No wagon road, no cleared lane, no sign of heavy traffic. But the ground changed. Roots had been cut or trained away. Stones had been placed at intervals where mud would have swallowed feet during rain. Small carved markers appeared beside the trail, crescent shapes and leaf patterns worked into wood posts no higher than my knee. A road, then. Not a road for machines. A road for memory. Solari slowed when we reached the first marker and touched it with 2 fingers as she passed. The other Aelari did the same. Nara noticed. Marsh noticed. I noticed too late and chose not to imitate the gesture because imitation without understanding felt worse than ignorance. Solari noticed that I did not. She did not correct me. That was either mercy or theology. After nearly 2 hours, the jungle thinned. Light changed first. The green darkness ahead broke into warmer bands. The air moved more freely. The insect noise shifted toward the edges, replaced by human-adjacent sounds that were not human. Low voices, rhythmic striking, a child's quick laugh abruptly hushed by an adult. Then we saw Evenal. The village sat in a shallow rise above a stream, built around stone terraces and raised wooden platforms that followed the land rather than dominating it. Houses stood on posts above the damp ground, their walls woven from pale wood and broad plant fibers, their roofs layered with dark leaves or bark tiles. Stone paths connected the platforms to communal courtyards. Water channels ran through the settlement in narrow-lined cuts, feeding gardens where pale flowers grew in shaded clusters. It was not primitive. That was the wrong word, and I hated how easily the mind reached for it. It was pre-industrial. It was local. It was built by hands and custom and generations of people who knew what flooded, what rotted, what needed shade, what direction the morning wind came from, and where the moonlight fell on ceremonial nights. A settled and ordered community. A place. The first villagers had gathered before we reached the outer terrace. By the time Aelari led us fully into the village, there were perhaps 200 of them. That number landed harder than the 11 in the clearing. 200 people made a crowd. 200 people made witness. 200 people made the moment no longer containable. The children were the worst part, not because they cried. They did not. Adults pulled them close and quieted them with hands on shoulders, whispers into hair, small fingers pressed down before pointing became rude. The children stared anyway. Everyone stared. Then, as Aelari approached the central path, the first row of adults knelt. The movement passed backward through the crowd like wind moving across tall grass. One group after another lowered themselves to the ground. Some bowed their heads. Some touched foreheads to stone. Others held their hands open before them, palms upward, a gesture the translator did not explain because gestures rarely came with subtitles. I kept walking because stopping would have made it worse. Nara walked beside me. Her face was composed in a way I knew cost her. She had seen temples in Japan. Shrines. Ceremonies. Offerings. She had been raised with enough cultural proximity to reverence that she understood something I was still learning in the marrow. This was not spectacle to them. This was real. Not metaphor. Not theater. Not superstition to be corrected by orbital mechanics and a nice lecture about shuttlecraft. A generational religious event was happening because 6 people had failed to avoid being seen in a clearing. And I was at the center of it. I felt too tall. That was not something I had expected to feel as guilt. None of the Aelari around us stood higher than 4 feet. Most were shorter. Their architecture fit them. Their steps, railings, platforms, doorways, benches, and water channels all fit bodies smaller than ours. I towered over them in a way that changed the air. Even Nara, at 5.5 feet, stood above Aelari and every adult in the village. Kimov was a giant. Russo, who had never seemed especially intimidating aboard Singapore when standing near Marines and Lenians and shipboard bulkheads, now looked like something from a cautionary myth about mountain men. Chen's quiet made him worse. The Aelari did not seem afraid in a simple way. Some were afraid, yes. Fear was in the way certain hands tightened, the way one child buried his face in an older woman's robe, the way several villagers carefully did not look directly at Kimov. But awe covered the fear, and expectation covered the awe. They had been waiting for something. They thought it was us. Aelari led us toward the center of the village. There, a stone platform rose from the central courtyard. It was not high by human standards, perhaps 3 steps above the surrounding ground, but it was clearly ceremonial. The stone was pale and worn smooth by generations of feet. Carved crescents circled the base. A solar disk had been cut into the eastern edge, its rays extending toward the steps. Water ran in a narrow channel around 3 sides of the platform before disappearing beneath the courtyard stones. Sun and moon, day and night, of course. Aelari stopped at the base of the platform and turned to face us. The entire village was silent. Not perfectly. Villages are never perfectly silent. Babies breathe, birds call, someone shifts weight, water moves through channels, but the silence of attention was complete. Aelari spoke in formal Aelari. The translator took a moment, then found the shape of it. Here the village hears, here the night is remembered, here the day is opened. Let those return stand where all may see and know that the roads have not been abandoned. I did not move, neither did Nara. Marsh stood behind us, pale and sweating, eyes moving over the carvings at the platform's base. Her field researcher's mind was trying to record details even while the rest of her body was filing protests. Kimov and his Marines had already adjusted, taking the 4 corners around us as best 3 men could, with Chen covering the rear angle and Russo standing to the right, as if he had been born into temple protocol. The Aelari accepted the arrangement without a murmur. Honor guard. Again. Aelari gestured to the space beside the platform, a lower stone bench shaded by a carved post. One of her attendants moved there and lowered her head toward Marsh. Place for the witness servant, the translator offered. Marsh's eyes narrowed slightly at witness servant. Do not argue, Nara murmured. I was not going to. You were thinking loudly. Marsh went to the indicated place with as much dignity as a wounded xenobiologist could manage. Nara watched every step. Once Marsh sat, one of Aelari's attendants brought water in a shallow cup and set it nearby without touching her. Then Aelari turned back to us. She indicated the steps. The meaning was obvious even before the translator caught up. The divine pair should ascend the platform. I looked at Nara. She looked at me. In that second there were a dozen things we might have said to each other if we had been alone. None of them belonged in the courtyard. Her hand found mine. Not hidden this time. If they were going to see what they already believed they saw, then they would at least see us step together rather than one leading and the other following. We climbed the steps side by side. The platform stone was warm under my boots. When we reached the top, the village lowered itself further. Heads bowed, hands opened. A low sound moved through the crowd, not a cheer, not a chant exactly. A breath given shape. I stood beside Nara at the center of Evenal and looked out over 200 people whose lives had just been changed by our arrival. Above the village, the sky was bright through gaps in the canopy. Somewhere beyond it, Singapore moved in shadow, waiting for a 10-minute window. Somewhere behind us, Bishop had vanished into cloud. Somewhere ahead, Thrihiel was moving toward the Hall of the Moon's Heart. And here, in the center of a village that had done nothing wrong except inherit a prophecy too specific to survive first contact, the sun and moon had taken the platform. I squeezed Nara's hand once. Then I let go before the gesture became scripture. 26. First night. Dusk came to Evenal in layers. First the jungle changed color. The green that had seemed endless under daylight deepened into blue shadow, and the spaces between leaves filled with a kind of living darkness that moved before the sky did. Then the village changed sound. Day insects quieted. Night insects began. Voices lowered across the platforms and courtyards, not into silence, but into a different register of being awake. The sky above the central platform turned from gold to violet. Nara and I remained where Aelari had placed us. That was the worst part in some ways. Not the danger, not even the worship. The stillness. The expectation that we should remain visible because whatever role we had been forced into required us to be seen. The stone platform at the center of Evenel had become a stage, altar, command post, and prison, depending on which part of my mind was currently losing the argument. Marsh had been installed in a small structure at the platform's base. Installed was the right word. Aelari's acolytes had led her there with great care and placed her on a low woven mat beside a bowl of water and a cup of something Nara had examined before allowing her to drink. Marsh had objected twice, then run out of strength and decided observation could be conducted horizontally. According to the translator's best efforts, the Aelari had assigned her the position of a lesser attendant to the divine pair. Marsh had looked at me when the translation came through. "I am going to have feelings about that later," she had said. "Please schedule them after extraction," I told her. "I will try." The Marines had adapted better than any of us. Kimov had shifted Chen and Russo into a loose perimeter pattern around the platform and the nearest approaches, not hidden, not threatening. Visible in the way honor guards were visible, which made the Aelari accept them without question. Every time one of the Marines changed position, the nearest villagers gave them space as if the movement were ceremonial rather than tactical. Russo, to his credit, had not said a word about it. That alone deserved a commendation. As the last daylight drained from the courtyard, Aelari returned. She came with 6 acolytes of the moon priesthood. All were robed in pale cloth, though only Aelari wore the crescent emblem at her throat. 2 carried a low table between them. 2 carried clay vessels filled with water. 1 carried folded cloth stacked high in both arms. The last carried a shallow bowl of white flowers that opened slowly as the light faded. The whole village watched from the edges of the courtyard. Not close, not crowding, watching. Aelari stopped at the base of the platform and bowed. "Great Aurelion," the translator murmured in my ear. "Lady Silunara, the road has held your steps, the day has carried you, the night receives you. Let the pair rest beneath the open sky." I glanced at Nara. Her expression was perfectly composed. That usually meant she was either calm or so far from calm that composure had become tactical. Aelari ascended 2 steps, then stopped before reaching the platform's top. She gestured to the acolytes. They moved with careful precision, placing the low table near one side of the platform. Another unfolded the cloth across the stone. It was not bedding in the way I expected. More like layers of thick woven fabric, soft but firm, arranged with exact corners and a narrow raised fold at one end. They were preparing the stone platform for us to sleep on. Publicly, of course they were. The divine pair descended from the sky. The divine pair would rest under the sky. Why would the divine pair be given a private room like ordinary travelers? The Aelari logic was terrible because it was internally consistent. The water came next. Aelari took one of the clay vessels and poured water into a shallow basin on the low table. The scent rose immediately, clean, mineral, faintly floral. Another acolyte placed folded cloth beside it. "Cleansing," Nara said softly. I nodded. Aelari looked to her. Nara stepped forward first. That was the right choice. I did not know whether she knew it instinctively, or simply because she recognized the pattern from a dozen human ritual analogies I did not have. She dipped her fingers into the water, touched it lightly to her hands, then to her brow. Not too much, not theatrical, a gesture of acceptance without pretending to know the full meaning. Aelari's face softened with something like relief. I followed Nara's lead. The water was cool. That should not have surprised me, but it did. After the heat of the jungle and the pressure of the day, the touch of it against my skin felt almost shocking. I touched my hands, then my brow, and hoped the translator would not be needed for the fact that I had no idea what I was doing. Aelari bowed again. The road dust is lifted. The night knows you. That seemed good. Or at least, not immediately catastrophic. Below the platform, the acolytes prepared separate bedding near Marsh's small structure, and along the edges of the courtyard where Kemov had indicated the Marines would rotate watch. They did it without confusion, without offense. Apparently divine attendants standing night watch fit the framework as neatly as everything else. Kemov stood beside me at the platform's edge. "Captain," he said quietly, "we will rotate 2 awake, 1 resting. Chen first rest. Russo and I first watch." "Accepted by the locals? Seems so?" Aelari looked toward him as he spoke, then to the acolytes arranging the guard bedding. She made a small sign with her staff. The acolytes placed 3 narrow mats in positions that matched Kemov's pattern almost exactly. Russo looked down at one of them. "That's unnerving." Kemov did not turn his head. "Do not complain when religion understands perimeter security." "Yes, Lieutenant." The acolytes withdrew one by one after the preparations were complete. The low table remained. The water remained. The folded cloth beneath us had become, by local logic, a bed. The white flowers opened fully in the bowl, reflecting what little light remained. Aelari was the last to leave. She stood at the base of the platform and looked up at us. For a moment she was not the high priestess receiving gods. She was a woman who had been awake too long and had chosen too much in too little time. I knew that look. I had seen it in mirrors. "The village will keep silence," she said. "No one will approach unless called. The night keepers will watch the paths. If the wolf moves, word will come." "Thank you," I said. The translator spoke the Aelari phrase. Aelari bowed. Then she turned and descended into the quiet village. The courtyard emptied by degrees. Families withdrew to raised houses. A few elders remained at the edge of the central space until Aelari's acolytes guided them away. Children were carried or led by the hand, some looking back until adults gently turned their faces forward. At last the village settled, not asleep, quiet. Kemov and Russo moved to opposite sides of the platform. Chen lay down on one of the prepared mats, but did not look as though he intended to sleep quickly. Marsh rested below us, a pale shape inside the small structure, Nara's medical monitor hidden under the cloth beside her. Nara and I were alone on the platform under the first stars, as alone as 2 people could be while being guarded by Marines, watched by a village, and mistaken for the central marriage of an alien cosmology. I sat down carefully on the prepared cloth. The fabric was cooler than the stone had been, tightly woven but soft enough that my knees did not immediately object. Nara sat beside me and ran one hand over the surface. "This reminds me of a traditional Japanese futon," she said softly. "That good or bad?" "Good." She pressed her palm against the layers. "Very good, actually. Firm, even, cooler now that the sun is down. I'm glad the theology comes with decent bedding." She gave me a look. "Too soon. By several centuries." Fair. The temperature had changed quickly after sunset. The day's heat still lived in the stone and the walls of the village, but the air above the platform had softened. Humidity remained, but without the direct sun, it no longer felt like being slowly cooked inside my own clothes. The night carried water smells from the stream and flowers from somewhere beyond the courtyard. I looked up. The stars were unfamiliar from this latitude. That was a strange thought to have on another planet. Of course the stars were unfamiliar. Every sky away from Earth had its own geometry. But there was something different about seeing them from the surface, with air between me and them and a village breathing quietly below. From orbit, stars belong to navigation. From the ground, they belonged to meaning. Somewhere up there, Singapore was moving through darkness, not visible, not to us, not now. Our first communication window would come later, if the orbital track and local horizon gave us the 10 minutes Bassi had promised. 10 minutes to report contact, status, loss of camp gear, Evenal, Aelari, the divine pair reception, and whatever else could fit inside a narrow line of sight burst before the ship passed beyond us again. 10 minutes to remind ourselves we had not actually been abandoned under alien stars. Nara sat beside me without speaking. The silence lengthened. Finally, I turned toward her. "I do not know how we do this," I said. My voice was so soft I barely heard it myself. Nara looked out over the village, then back at me. Her face was tired. Beautiful, yes, but not in any way the Aelari would have meant if they were still watching. Human tired. Doctor tired. Woman who had carried too much and was still standing tired. "We do it together," she said. There was no drama in it. That was why it helped. We lay down side by side on the cloth. The platform was wide enough that we had space between us, but not much. The Aelari had arranged the bedding for a pair. Of course they had. Refusing that would have meant something. Accepting it also meant something. Every movement was a language in a dialect we did not speak. Nara settled on her back and exhaled. "It really is comfortable," she said. "I'll put that in the report." "No, you won't." "No, I won't." I folded one arm beneath my head and looked at the stars. Sleep did not come. It should have. I was exhausted from descent, contact, procession, standing on the platform saying almost nothing while hundreds of people reorganized their understanding of the universe around us. My body wanted sleep. My mind refused the order. Marsh coughed once below us. Nara half rose. "She is all right," Kimov said quietly from the edge of the platform. Nara listened for another breath, then lowered herself back down. "He is watching her monitor," I said. "I know." "Still hard?" "Yes." The village below remained quiet. The jungle beyond it did not. Night creatures called, clicked, trilled, and moved through leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a deeper sound rolled once and faded. Not thunder. Animal, maybe, or something else. I filed it under things to ask Marsh if morning came gently enough. Morning, that was the next problem. Morning would bring villagers, questions, offerings, Aelari, the road to the Hall of the Moon's Heart, Thrihiel ahead of us, a communication window above us, a ship we could not see, a role we could not safely refuse. The first night of the stranding had begun. I turned my head slightly. Nara's eyes were still open. Above us, constellations no human had named burned over Evenal. Somewhere beyond them, Singapore crossed the sky in silence, carrying Hernandez, Bishop, Varos, Bassi, Gibby, and the rest of the crew through a shadowed orbit we could only trust existed. I closed my eyes. Not because I expected sleep, because command sometimes required pretending at rest until the body believed you. Beside me, Nara breathed slowly. Below us, the village kept silence for its returned gods. And far above, beyond the reach of prayer, radio, and almost everything except duty, my ship moved through the dark. 27. The window. Hernandez stayed in the mess after Bishop and Varos left. That was not because she was hungry. She had finished her tea 20 minutes ago, and had eaten enough of Gibby's leftover dessert to confirm that eaten mess was better than its name suggested. The strawberries had been excellent, which meant Gibby would be insufferable about them in the morning, if the morning came gently. She sat alone at the table with her tablet still open. The ship's status reports, arranged in neat columns that had begun to blur from repetition rather than fatigue. Singapore remained in her shadowed parking orbit around Aelari Prime, holding the night side of the planet as if the darkness itself were part of the hull. Their orbital track kept them hidden from the star's direct light, and minimized the chance that anyone on the surface would see anything that did not belong in a Bronze Age sky. That was the theory. Hernandez preferred theories that came with more certainty. The landing party had been on the surface for several hours. Bishop had returned with Shuttle One earlier, white-faced with controlled frustration, and filed her report with the careful precision of an officer who hated what she had to write. The shuttle had landed intact. The team had disembarked. Aelari movement had approached from the south. Bishop had been ordered to lift immediately before the shuttle could be seen. The camp gear had remained aboard. Hernandez had read that line 3 times. No shelter rolls. No expanded water system. No disguised sensor packs. No extra medical packs beyond what Himura had carried in the plain satchel. No field rations beyond what the landing party had on their persons. Hansen had gone planet-side with less than a proper reconnaissance team should have had, and far less than Hernandez wanted him to have. Likely local contact. That had been Bishop's final assessment. Likely because Bishop was too disciplined to write certainty into a report she had not personally observed. Hernandez had read the report and translated it anyway. Hansen and Himura had probably been seen. If they had been seen, the Divine Pair framework had almost certainly activated. If that had happened, the mission had become something Doctrine could barely describe, let alone control. She closed the report again. Across the mess, Bishop and Varos had left their plates neatly stacked near the recycler. Bishop had finished the documentary about Charles Lindbergh's flight across the Atlantic with the distracted focus of someone watching one dangerous landing while thinking about another. Varos had asked 5 questions about the spirit of St. Louis that Hernandez suspected would lead him into a full technical review of early 20th century aircraft design before the week was out. They had gone off afterward toward officer berthing, to their respective bunks. Hernandez had noticed the way they left together and separated without ceremony at the corridor junction. Bishop had said something too quiet to hear. Varos had answered with the grave seriousness he brought to engineering tolerances and unfamiliar desserts. Bishop had laughed, but softly, not the bridge laugh. Not the easy public one she used to keep rooms from getting too tense. Something quieter. Something hers. Hernandez had noticed. She had been noticing for weeks. The relationship, if that was what it was becoming, remained undeclared. Perhaps even to them. Bishop framed everything in humor until she trusted it enough to name it. Varos came from a culture where shared work, practical gifts, and long silences could mean more than flirtation ever did in human terms. It was entirely possible they were already halfway into something serious by Lennian standards, while still circling the first honest conversation by Bishop's. It was also not interfering with duty. Bishop flew clean. Varos maintained discipline. Neither had compromised a watch, delayed a report, or allowed personal feeling to blur professional judgment. If anything, they worked better together than they had before, and they had worked well from the beginning. So Hernandez left it alone. Command was not interference for the pleasure of being correct. A ship needed boundaries, not a supervisor standing in every doorway waiting to audit affection. Her tablet chimed. The incoming call came from the bridge. Ensign Gomez, Night Watch helm. Hernandez accepted. Gomez appeared on the small display, seated at the helm beneath low watch lighting. He was young enough that the Academy still showed in his posture. Filipino, precise, and careful in the way junior officers became careful when speaking to the XO during a quiet crisis. "Commander," he said, "we are approaching the first contact window with the landing party." Hernandez straightened. Signal conditions: projected line of sight in 4 minutes. Duration 8 minutes 40 seconds, perhaps 10 if atmospheric scatter is favorable. Bridge status: all stations green. No launch activity from the surface. No movement from the lunar cargo handler. Bassie's passive net remains stable. Very well. Route the surface signal to the captain's ready room. Gomez blinked once. Only once. Aye, Commander. Hernandez stood, collected her tablet, and left the mess. She did not choose the ready room for comfort. She chose it because the surface call needed privacy, because Hansen would have taken it there if he had been aboard, and because the room was close enough to the ship's domestic center that she could still feel Singapore around her while hearing what had happened below. The door opened at her command. Hansen's ready room was dim, lit by the standby glow of the desk and the reflected gold of the Kennedy portrait on the wall. The Schickler painting looked down with the familiar bowed head and folded arms, that private burden turned into public memory. The 6 ship models rested on the desk: Singapore, Victory, Enterprise C V6, Vostok, Apollo, and the fictional Enterprise NCC 1701. The Wilson football sat on the shelf where Hansen kept it when he was not turning it through his hands. Hernandez had been in the room hundreds of times. It felt different without him. She sat at his desk, not in his chair with any sense of possession. That would have felt wrong. She sat because the ship needed someone there, and because Hansen had placed the ship in her hands before descending. The display came alive. Gomez's voice came through first. Commander, surface contact acquired. Audio only. Signal narrow and intermittent but readable. Put it through. Static. Then Kemov. Singapore ground team, this is Kemov. Hernandez leaned forward. Ground team Singapore, Hernandez, report. His voice carried background noise, insects, wind, distant water, and something low and rhythmic that might have been voices or drums too far away for the translator to catch. Kemov himself sounded calm. That helped. Not enough, but some. Landing party alive. No injuries beyond existing condition of Dr. Marsh. Local contact occurred within minutes of shuttle departure. Hernandez closed one hand around the edge of the desk. Confirmed, Aelari? Confirmed. 11-person party, ceremonial and scouting mix. Led by Aelari, High Priestess of Silunara from village Avenal. Hernandez had to force herself not to look at Kennedy. And Captain Hansen? Captain and Dr. Himura were received as divine pair. Aurelian and Silunara equivalents, sun and moon, the framework activated immediately. There it was. Not likely. Confirmed. Hernandez entered the note on her tablet even though the call was being recorded. Her fingers moved cleanly despite the feeling in her chest. Status of contact? Stable. No hostility from locals. High reverence. Significant ritual structure. Captain chose to accept escort to Avenal to avoid escalation and gather intelligence. Location now? Avenal Village. Approximately 2-hour march from landing zone. Platform at village center. Captain and Dr. Himura placed on ceremonial platform, both visible to local population. They are currently resting together on prepared bedding on the platform. Hernandez paused. That detail was tactically irrelevant and culturally enormous. Resting together, she repeated. Correct. Refusal would likely have created confusion or insult. They accepted with minimal participation. Dr. Himura maintained composure. Of course she had. Hernandez pictured it with too much clarity. Hansen and Himura lying under unfamiliar stars, while an entire village held silence around them. Not as officers, not as doctor and captain, but as the married order of day and night. What about Dr. Marsh? Hernandez asked. Accepted as attendant or witness servant category. Installed in a small structure at platform base. Dr. Himura monitoring her directly. Marsh remains ambulatory but weak. And the Marines? Accepted as Divine Honor Guard. My assessment, open guard posture reduces uncertainty. Chen and Russo rotating watch with me. Locals accept this as normal. Threats? No immediate hostile activity. Aelari reports Wolf's servants moved through Western Road Network asking for the hall. Likely Thrihiel's ground party. Unknown strength. Unknown distance. Hernandez entered that. How certain is Captain Hansen that the Aelari understanding cannot be corrected? Kehlar did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter. Commander, I am not anthropologist, but I watched them kneel. Correction would not correct. It would break something. Hernandez let that sit for 1 second. Understood. The signal fluttered. Gomez broke in from the bridge. Commander, window degrading. 6 minutes remaining at best. Ground team continue? Kehlar did. Captain intends to maintain current posture through first night. No visible use of communicators. No visible technology. We will await morning contact with Aelari and assess route to Hall of the Moon's Heart. Expect more ritual activity at dawn or after. Not sure what form. Strong probability of offerings, public address, or priesthood consultation. Supplies? Limited. Loss of camp gear noted. Personal water and emergency food only. Local water available but untested. Dr. Himura has medical bag. Concealed sidearms retained. Standard communicators held by Captain, Dr. Himura, and myself hidden. Passive ear units operational. Translator functional but imperfect. Extraction options? Difficult without public exposure. Shuttle return in daylight would be seen. Night extraction possible depending on clearing and cloud. Captain's condition? Operational. Himura? Operational, angry. For the first time all evening, Hernandez almost smiled. That is useful data. Yes, Commander? Anything else? Another brief hesitation. Captain wants no action from Singapore unless Thrihiel's ship moves. Launch activity threatens the team, or a pre-planned extraction signal is sent. He says you already have the orders. I do. I believe he expected you to dislike them. He was correct. Good. The word sounded like Kehlar's version of reassurance. Static thickened. Gomez, Commander, 2 minutes. Hernandez looked at the status board. No hostile movement. No lunar cargo handler activity. No surface launch. Ground team. Singapore copies all. Maintain concealed posture. Next window in 1 orbital cycle. If unable to make contact, we will assume calm discipline unless emergency signal received. Copy. Lieutenant. Yes, Commander. Tell Captain Hansen the ship is holding. Kehlar's answer came through at once. He knows. Then the signal broke. The room went quiet. Hernandez sat at Hansen's desk, the fading edge of Kehlar's voice still in the speakers, and looked at the football on the shelf. The ship is holding. It sounded simple. It was not. She opened a new dispatch file. Bridge, she said. Gomez answered immediately. Bridge. Prepare stealth courier drone. Houston priority. Warden channel and naval intelligence encryption. Include full surface contact update and confirmation of divine pair reception. Aye, Commander. Launch from masked outbound vector at next safe point. No standard beacon, no broad handshake. Understood. She assembled the report herself. Surface team alive. Aelari contact confirmed. Captain Hansen and Dr. Himura received as Aurelion Selunara divine pair. Avenel village led by High Priestess Aelari. Marines accepted as honor guard. Marsh accepted as attendant witness role. Thrihiel's ground element likely identified locally as wolf servants. Landing party lacking full camp gear. No immediate hostile contact. Situation culturally unstable. She sent it to the bridge for drone load. Then she leaned back in Hansen's chair and looked at the Kennedy portrait. Houston would receive the drone when it received it. The admirals would read the report in clean rooms with clean air and full lighting. Naval intelligence would analyze it. Concord legal advisors would start sharpening arguments. Politicians, once the information reached them, would see risk, leverage, scandal, oversight, and opportunity in whatever order suited them best. Safely away from the platform. Safely away from the villagers kneeling. Safely away from the choice not to destroy a religion in the first sentence. Hernandez did not consider herself cynical. She considered herself experienced enough to know that distance turned consequences into positions. Some admiral in Houston would call Hansen's decision inevitable. Another would call it reckless. Someone in Berlin would eventually discover a way to make moral purity sound useful while risking nothing. Someone else would try to turn the fact that humans had been mistaken for gods into a committee question about warden discretion. Hernandez looked at the ship models on the desk. Victory, Enterprise, Vostok, Apollo, Singapore. Ships went, committees followed. That had probably always been true. Courier ready, Gomez reported. Launch when clear. A moment later, drone away, running dark. Very well. She ended the connection and remained in the ready room for another minute. Hansen and Himura were on a stone platform under alien stars. Kimov, Chen, and Russo were pretending to be an honor guard because that was the least damaging way to keep them alive. Marsh was being treated as an attendant to gods whose biology she had studied from orbit. Bishop and Varos were asleep, or pretending to be, in separate bunks after watching a documentary about a man who crossed an ocean and landed in a life he could not have imagined. And Singapore moved through shadow above all of it. Hernandez stood, collected her tablet, and turned off the desk display. Before leaving, she looked once more at Kennedy. "I hope you enjoyed committees," she said softly. The painting did not answer. That was probably for the best. 28. Offering. Morning came to Evenal without hurry. The sky above the village brightened first in the spaces between the canopy. Gray became blue. Blue became gold. The leaves overhead caught the light one by one until the jungle seemed to wake in layers, each branch and vine remembering its color at a different pace. The village woke more carefully. No one rushed into the central courtyard. No children ran across the stones. No one shouted for breakfast or argued over tools or called to someone on a neighboring platform. Evenal rose in quiet motion, as if every person in it knew they were living inside a day that would be remembered after they were gone. That was the part that kept landing wrong in my chest. To us, this was an operation. To them, this was history. Nara and I remained on the stone platform where Aelari had placed us the night before. We had slept, technically. Not well, not for long. Enough for the body to file a minimal compliance report and move on. The layered cloth beneath us had been more comfortable than stone had any right to be, and the air after midnight had cooled enough to make the humidity bearable. But sleep had come in pieces. Every time I opened my eyes, unfamiliar stars were overhead, and a Bronze Age village was keeping silence around us, because it believed the Sun Father and Moon Mother had returned. Now daylight had made us visible again. Nara sat beside me, hair tied back, face composed. The plain medical satchel rested near her knee. Her eyes moved across the courtyard with the calm attention she brought to sickbay rounds, except this time the patient was an entire village, and the illness was us. Below the platform, Marsh had emerged from the small structure assigned to her and sat in the shade, wrapped in a light cloth one of Aelari's acolytes had brought at dawn. She looked better than she had during the march. That meant she looked less likely to collapse immediately, which Nara had decided to count as improvement. Kimov stood at the eastern edge of the courtyard. Chen had taken the western approach. Russo was near the path that led toward the stream, looking alert and miserable in the way only a Marine denied coffee could look. They had rotated through the night exactly as Kemov had promised. The Aelari had accepted the watch pattern with complete seriousness. Somewhere between dusk and dawn, the Marines had stopped being simply our security detail and become part of the village's religious architecture. Honor guard. I was beginning to hate how useful that was. The first villagers appeared at the edges of the courtyard as the sun rose above the trees. They came in small family clusters, then larger groups. Adults first. Children kept close. No one approached the platform without stopping at a respectful distance. No one called out. They watched us with the solemn intensity of people attending a ceremony whose rules they knew and whose meaning had suddenly become terrifyingly immediate. Then Aelari arrived. She came from the moon house on the northern side of the courtyard with a small procession of acolytes behind her. In daylight, the details of her robes were clearer. Pale cloth layered over green undergarments. Crescent markings stitched in silver thread or something like it. A cord of carved beads at her waist. Her face had been marked again with white lines at brow and cheek. Fresh and precise. The acolytes carried food. 3 low tables, each borne by 2 young attendants. The tables were no higher than my shin, made of polished wood with carved legs and woven mats across the top. On them rested platters of prepared food arranged with such obvious care that even before I knew whether we could eat any of it, I understood refusing would wound something deeper than hospitality. Roasted root vegetables split open and glazed with oil or resin, smoked river fish, silver skin darkened at the edges, arranged on broad leaves, fruit in carved bowls, orange, red, and gold, sliced into crescent shapes. Flat rounds of ceremonial bread stacked beneath a cloth embroidered with the same moon and vine pattern I had seen on the road markers. Real food, not symbolic scraps, not token offerings. Food prepared by hands that knew what they were doing, and presented by people who believed the prosperity of their village depended on what happened next. Aelari reached the base of the platform and knelt. The acolytes knelt with her, lowering the tables carefully to the stone. The entire courtyard followed. 200 people bowed themselves toward us. I heard Nara inhale quietly beside me. Aelari lifted her face. The translator caught the ritual register faster this morning. Bassi's language model was learning. That fact should have reassured me. Instead, it made the whole thing feel more permanent. "Great Aurelian," Aelari said. "Lady Selonara, the road has carried you. The night has sheltered you. The village has kept silence beneath your rest." She touched her forehead to the stone, then rose only to her knees. "The day opens. The hearth waits. The gods must eat, that the fields may wake, the waters may run, and the children may grow beneath the turning of sun and moon." The gods must eat. Of course they must. Gibby had said almost the same thing on Singapore, except Gibby's version had been practical and kind, and came with Hainanese chicken rice. This was different. This was load-bearing. Aelari continued, "If the pair accepts the village's hand, the village is seen. If the village is seen, the roots remember. If the roots remember, hunger does not cross the threshold." No pressure, then. I looked at Nara. Her eyes were already on me. We had not eaten since before the shuttle descent. We had water from our personal supplies, but using it publicly was impossible. We had emergency food concealed in our clothing, but eating that while refusing a ceremonial offering would create exactly the kind of insult Bassi and Marsh had spent an entire briefing warning us not to make. I glanced down toward Marsh. She was watching the food with intense professional focus. Even wounded, Half exhausted and trapped in the role of divine attendant, Helen Marsh remained a field scientist. Her eyes moved from platter to platter, cataloging shape, color, preparation method, surface oils, probable species, and risk. She had spent 2 years studying Aelari foodways. If anyone on the surface could give us permission to survive breakfast, it was her. Her gaze lifted to mine. She gave one small nod. Then, with the tiniest movement of her fingers, she indicated the fruit first. Safe. Bread next. Safe. Root vegetables. Safe. Fish. Caution. I remembered her notes. Aelari aquatic protein carried compounds humans processed slowly. Not toxic. Not safe in quantity. The kind of food a human could eat politely and regret later if he decided politeness required enthusiasm. I looked back at the offering. The village waited. The problem with rituals is that they take a moment and make it larger than the people inside it. Reaching for breakfast became a statement about cosmology. Picking a piece of fruit became a political act. Eating became consent to a framework I did not believe and could not safely reject. I had spent years in command learning to make decisions. This did not feel like a decision. It felt like stepping onto thin ice because the people behind me had already followed. I moved slowly, deliberately. No sudden reach, no casual grab, no joking deflection. I extended my hand toward the fruit platter as if I understood exactly what the moment required, which was a lie, but at least a dignified one. The courtyard held its breath. I took one crescent of orange-red fruit. Aelari wept. Not loudly, not dramatically. Tears gathered in her eyes and spilled down the white markings on her cheeks while her face remained lifted toward us in joy so intense it hurt to look at. That was when I understood the offering had not been a formality. Some part of her had not known whether we would accept. Some part of her had feared the village would present its best food and the returned gods would turn away. I hated that my hand had the power to do this. I hated more that it did. Beside me, Nara reached for the bread. Her motion was as careful as mine had been. She took one small round from the stack, lifted it with both hands for half a second, not as blessing, not exactly, but with enough reverence to show she understood it had been given, and then set it on the cloth between us. The acolytes lowered their faces to the stone. A sound moved through the villagers. Not a cheer at first, a release. Then it rose, soft voices, then more of them, until a small, restrained cheer filled the courtyard. Some wept, some laughed. Children who had been held silent pressed against adults and stared with shining eyes. One old man folded both hands over his face and rocked forward until the woman beside him steadied him. The village had been seen. The roots remembered. Hunger, presumably, had been instructed to stay outside the threshold. Kemov watched from the edge of the courtyard. His face was unreadable to anyone who did not know him. I knew him well enough to see that he understood what had happened. Not the theology. The commitment. His captain had just accepted the village's offering in a public ritual, and the mission had changed shape around that fact. Chen saw it too. He did not move. Russo looked from the villagers to me, then to the food, and for once seemed to decide that the best thing he could contribute was silence. That alone told me the moment had weight. I brought the fruit to my mouth and took a bite. It was sweet. Not like an apple, not like citrus, though the first note had something bright in it. The texture was closer to pear, but denser, with a faint resinous edge that lingered on the tongue. It tasted alive in a way that made me suddenly aware of how far I was from any food system built for humans. I chewed slowly and swallowed. No immediate burning. No numbness. No collapse into religiously inconvenient death. Progress. Nara broke a piece from the bread and ate. She chewed once, twice, then gave me the slightest nod. Good enough. The cheer softened into reverent murmuring. Aelari remained on her knees at the platform's base, tears still on her face. She spoke again, voice unsteady. "The pair has accepted, the village is held." The translator rendered the phrase cleanly. "The village is held." I wondered how many times in human history food had done exactly this. Created obligation, bound stranger to host, turned danger into relationship, or relationship into danger. Bread and salt, rice and sake, shared cups, broken loaves, ritual meals around fires, altars, tents, temples, and tables. We had not conquered anything. We had eaten fruit and bread. Somehow that felt more dangerous. Aelari gestured to the acolytes. The offering tables remained before us, but additional platters were brought forward now. Not to the platform, to the base of it, where Marsh sat. Then to the outer edges of the courtyard, where the Marines held their positions. The village had fed the divine pair first. Now it would feed those attached to them. Marsh looked up sharply as an acolyte placed a small bowl of roasted root vegetables and fruit beside her. Nara immediately shifted, ready to intervene if the food was unsafe or the movement too much. Marsh examined the bowl, then looked at the acolyte. "Thank you," she said. The translator spoke for her. The acolyte bowed so deeply that Marsh looked briefly horrified. "I am definitely having feelings about this later," she murmured. Nara almost smiled. At the perimeter, two young Aelari approached Kemov with a platter held between them. They looked terrified but determined. Kemov lowered his gaze to the food, then to them, and inclined his head with solemn precision. He accepted a piece of roasted root. The Aelari nearly vibrated with relief. Chen received fruit. Russo received bread and what appeared to be a small portion of smoked fish. He looked down at it, then across the courtyard toward Chen. His voice came through my earpiece on the marine channel, low enough that only we heard it. "Hey, Chen?" Chen did not move his head. "What?" "Divine Pair Honor Guard gets fed too." Chen's mouth twitched. Kemov's voice cut in quietly. "Eat respectfully, Russo." "Yes, Lieutenant." A pause. Then Russo added, "Respectfully grateful, sir." "Better?" I looked down at the fruit in my hand and took another bite because not finishing it might mean something, and because I was hungry, and because the village was watching with the fragile hope of people who had offered their best and needed it to matter. Nara ate another piece of bread. Aelari's shoulders lowered by a fraction, as if some terrible possibility had moved past her without striking. The offering continued around us. Acolytes poured water into shallow cups. The village murmured ritual phrases the translator only partly caught. Children watched the Marines eat with the fascinated intensity of children everywhere, watching adults do something important and incomprehensible. The food was good. That made it worse. It would have been easier if the offering were merely symbolic, something dry and ceremonial and barely edible. Instead, it was breakfast. Carefully prepared breakfast from people who had probably given us food meant for their own families, their own elders, their own festival stores. The roasted root vegetables smelled rich and earthy. The bread had a nutty sweetness. The fruit in my hand was bright and strange and real. This was not theology in the abstract. This was a village feeding strangers because it believed the world depended on hospitality. And we had accepted. There would be no reversing that cleanly. A refusal could have remained ambiguous, a misunderstanding. A delay, a sign not yet interpreted. Acceptance was clear. The religious situation was now load-bearing. Everything that happened next would rest partly on this meal, the villagers' trust, Aelari's authority, our access to information, maybe our ability to reach the hall of the moon's heart before Thrihiel turned the Aelari's own beliefs against them. Maybe their faith would survive us. Maybe it would not. Nara's hand rested briefly on the cloth between us, close enough that I could have touched it if we had been alone. We were not alone. We were visible to 200 people and likely to generations after them, whether we wanted that or not. I kept my eyes on the offering table. "The fruit is good," I said softly. Nara glanced at me. A small human reply in the middle of the impossible. "Yes," she said. "The bread too." Aelari heard the translated words. Her face broke into something like joy again, and the acolytes lowered themselves. That was when I understood even our simplest sentences had become dangerous. The divine pair had approved the fruit. The divine pair had approved the bread. Some farmer's family line might tell that story for 100 years. I swallowed. The chapter of history we had entered was being written faster than we could stop it. Below the platform, Marsh ate carefully from her bowl, eyes still tracking everything. Kimov, Chen, and Russo accepted their portions with the grave discipline of men who knew they were no longer simply eating. The village watched, murmured, breathed, believed. The food offering was complete. The gods had eaten. And because we had eaten, we now belonged to Evenal in a way no report to the Concord would ever fully explain. 29. Children Concerns. Volkson read the children government's response 3 times. The first reading gave him the words. The second gave him the structure. The third gave him the silences. His quarters were dim. The Houston skyline beyond the window reduced to broken columns of light against the late evening haze. Coalition Navy had assigned him an apartment larger than any one children required. Human hospitality tended towards space. Children comfort tended toward enclosure. He had adapted by keeping only one corner fully lit and using the rest of the room as shadow. Tonight the shadows suited him. The courier drone from his home institution had arrived in the late afternoon, folded into the standard Concord exchange traffic, and then separated into the secure Warden channel. The response had come under formal seal from the Children Concord Liaison Directorate, copied to 2 scientific councils and 1 office whose title translated poorly into Coalition Standard, but meant, approximately, the ministry responsible for matters too old to be trusted to ordinary archives. Volkson had known that copy line mattered before he opened the packet. Now he sat with the message suspended before him, its careful language arranged in the air. The children government acknowledged the coalition's update regarding the cipher map confirmation. The children government affirmed support for the human coalition's lawful response to the developing Aelari Prime crisis. The children government expressed concern regarding Thrihiel's continued violation of Concord non-interference principles. The children government stood ready to provide technical and diplomatic assistance through established channels. All precise, all appropriate, all clean. Then came the paragraph Volkson had read 3 times. Regarding possible precursor network implications, current children institutional knowledge remains limited. Existing records do not support definitive conclusions concerning the origin, purpose, or operational status of the identified nodes. Further interpretation should proceed cautiously and in coordination with multi-species review bodies. He stared at the sentence until the words began to lose their edges. Current children institutional knowledge remains limited, not absent, limited. Existing records do not support definitive conclusions. Not no records exist, do not support definitive conclusions. Further interpretation should proceed cautiously, not proceed freely. Cautiously. Volkson lowered one hand to the arm of his chair and let his claws rest lightly against the surface. He had spent enough of his career in intergovernmental work to respect careful language. Careless language killed negotiations, embarrassed ministries, and sometimes started wars. A government did not say more than it could defend. It did not expose uncertainty beyond usefulness. It did not admit knowledge in a channel that might later become evidence. He understood all of that. He had written messages like this. That was why the message troubled him. The wording was not false. He could not prove that it was false. He did not even believe, in the direct sense, that his government was lying. The children officials who prepared this response might very well believe exactly what the message said. Institutional knowledge could be limited because records were fragmentary, because archives were incomplete, because precursor artifacts had been studied by committees separated by decades and classification boundaries. A civilization could be ignorant without being deceitful. Vrolksen believed that. He needed to believe it. He had been working with Hansen in good faith. He had been working with Fevai, Joseph, Archuleta, and the Houston team in good faith. His dispatches had been honest, if sometimes incomplete in ways he had judged protective. His institutional channels had responded through proper procedure. Nothing in the packet suggested obstruction. Nothing suggested bad intent. Still, he read the paragraph again. Current children institutional knowledge remains limited. He thought of the way certain older children diplomats stopped speaking when the lunar wreck entered conversation. He thought of the archival marker class he had recognized before Fevai's team had given it a name. He thought of Thrihiel on the far side of events, somehow carrying enough knowledge to move from Eden to Aelari Prime with purpose. He thought of the boy. Joseph Thompson had seen the map before the adults around him were ready to admit it was one. That was not mystical. Vrolksen distrusted mystical explanations except as cultural data. Joseph's genetic expression, his unusual Lennian inheritance, and the cipher's own biological indexing logic were sufficient explanation for the pattern of events. Sufficient did not mean comforting. Vrolksen dismissed the government packet from the main display and opened his private notes. He did not write accusations. Accusations required evidence. He wrote observations. Language in directorate response carefully limits children knowledge without denying existence of relevant archival material. Ministry equivalent archival office copied on response. Significance unclear. No direct denial of prior children precursor note awareness. No direct denial of historical observation of human-related precursor sites. He paused before saving the final line. It was too broad. Too dangerous. He revised it. Recommend continued attention to omissions in future institutional responses. That was acceptable. He encrypted the note under his personal Warden archive and filed it where no routine administrative review would surface it. Private doubts did not become operational facts merely because they were uncomfortable. But they should not be thrown away. He opened the daily dispatch template. The standard report went to his home institution every day, whether events warranted urgency or not. Stability required rhythm. Diplomacy required paperwork. The universe did not become less dangerous because reports bored the people writing them. He summarized the day. Coalition security posture in Houston had increased following the attempted abduction of Joseph Thompson. The surviving Kehlar prisoner remained non-cooperative. Recovered equipment strongly supported prior assessment of Thrihiel-linked mercenary coordination. Fevai's team continued refinement of the 11-node map. Archuleta had authorized enhanced protection for Joseph's movement between residence, school, and laboratory. Joseph intended to return to the lab under guard. Vrolksen paused there. He considered omitting that last sentence. Then he left it in. His government would know soon enough. Better they know through him, with context, than through a clipped coalition security digest stripped of the boy's agency. He added the context. Subject Thompson remains emotionally affected by attack, but expresses desire to continue controlled participation in laboratory work. This desire appears self-directed and should not be interpreted as coercion by coalition personnel. Admiral Archuleta continues to act in a protective guardian capacity. He reread the sentence. Good. Then he added the Aelari Prime section. The latest confirmed update from Singapore had not yet reached Houston, but the stealth courier sent earlier had been received by the ship before surface descent. Hansen now knew the cipher was a map. Hansen knew Aelari Prime was one of 11 nodes. Further updates were expected by courier lag. Vrolkson's claws hovered above the confirmation command. A standard daily dispatch would travel through ordinary protected channels. It would not run dark. It would not reach Aelari Prime quickly enough to shape immediate events. It would become part of the institutional record, and the institutional record mattered. But Hansen needed more than records. Vrolkson opened a second packet. This one was shorter. Warden Channel Priority. Destination, Aelari Prime System. Recipient, Captain Peter Hansen, HCS Singapore, Concord Warden Authority. Transmission method, stealth courier drone. Vrolkson composed the message with care. He informed Hansen that the attempted abduction of Joseph Thompson had been carried out by Kehlar mercenaries using equipment, routing practices, and timing consistent with Thrihiel's known operational methods. He stated that the attack appeared coordinated to coincide with Singapore's Aelari Prime descent, and likely intended to exploit Hansen's physical separation from Houston, Archuleta's divided attention, and Joseph's increased importance after the cipher map confirmation. He did not embellish. He did not speculate beyond the evidence. He did include one sentence that was not strictly necessary. Joseph Thompson survived physically unharmed. He remains under Archuleta's protection. Hansen would need that. Vrolkson knew enough about the human captain to be certain. He attached the relevant weapon scans, mercenary equipment signatures, prisoner status, and his own analysis. Then he considered whether to include the children government response, not the full packet. No, that would be improper, diplomatically hazardous, and perhaps useless to Hansen in the field. But the fact of the response mattered. He added a final paragraph. Children government channels acknowledged the map confirmation and state support for coalition action at Aelari Prime. They characterized children institutional knowledge of precursor history as limited and urged cautious interpretation through multi-species review. I assessed the response as formally cooperative. I also assessed that the language leaves unresolved questions concerning archival awareness. No operational conclusion recommended at this time. He reread it. The paragraph was dangerous because it was honest. Honesty often was. He encrypted the packet, sealed it under his warden authority, and transmitted it to the launch queue. Somewhere beneath the Houston complex, a stealth courier drone would be loaded in darkness, its route calculated toward Aelari Prime. It would carry his concerns through the same interstellar silence that made every urgent message feel like an apology to the people who needed it. He sent the standard daily dispatch next. That one went to his home institution. Proper channel, proper seal, proper language. When both confirmations returned, Vrolkson shut down the display. The room fell into deeper shadow. He remained seated for several minutes, listening to the environmental system and the distant, muted life of human headquarters beyond his walls. Houston did not sleep the way children cities slept. Human military centers always seemed to keep some part of themselves awake. Lit corridors and moving vehicles and voices in rooms where decisions waited for dawn. He thought of Joseph asleep in Archuleta's apartment, with security at the perimeter and a father's handwritten letter somewhere nearby. He thought of Hansen and Imura on Aelari Prime, likely already inside the first contact disaster everyone had tried to avoid. He thought of Fevai, who would arrive at the lab in the morning and continue the work because she was incapable of doing otherwise. Then he thought again of the children response. Limited knowledge, careful cooperation, unresolved questions. Rolkson stood. His side still ached from the fight near the academy perimeter. Medical personnel had told him to rest. Human doctors, he had discovered, gave rest instructions with the misplaced confidence of people who believed duty could be scheduled around tissue repair. Tonight, perhaps, he would obey them, not because they were correct, because tomorrow would require precision. He crossed to the sleeping alcove, lowered the room lights, and settled into the compact bedding arrangement he had finally persuaded Coalition facilities to provide after 3 weeks of excessive human furniture. Before closing his eyes, he allowed himself one final private conclusion. He believed his government was acting in good faith. He believed Hansen was acting in good faith. He believed Archuleta, Fevai, and the boy were acting in good faith. The problem was that history did not require bad faith to become dangerous. Sometimes omission was enough. He filed that thought with the others. Then Rolkson went to bed. 30 and Thrihiel decides. Thrihiel laughed. It startled the 2 scouts standing before him. That pleased him almost as much as the report. He had not laughed properly in too long. Not the clipped sound he used when subordinates needed to understand that their fear amused him. Not the polite growl he offered during negotiations with smugglers who believed caution and intelligence were the same virtue. Not the theatrical bark expected of a Kehlar commander when blood, honor, and grievance required appropriate display. This was real laughter. Low at first, then fuller, enough that one of the Aelari translators perched on the supply crate lowered his eyes and pretended not to hear. Wise little creature. Thrihiel appreciated practical cowardice when it came with discipline. The encampment lay several kilometers from Evenal, tucked beneath a shelf of black stone where the jungle rose toward the first broken ridges west of the Hall of the Moon's Heart. It was not large. That was deliberate. A large camp belonged to armies. Thrihiel had not brought an army. Armies were loud. Armies required supply. Armies announced intention. He had brought a knife instead. A handful of Kehlar loyalists. 3 hired local guides who believed they were dealing with a wolf spirit's emissaries and had enough greed to make that belief negotiable. 2 portable sensor arrays disguised beneath woven tarps. A field transmitter, crates of trade goods, stolen Kestrel data. Patience. Patience was the part most of his enemies failed to recognize in him. They saw the teeth first. That was their mistake. His scout captain, Rethak, remained kneeling until Thrihiel's laughter faded. "You saw this yourself?" Thrihiel asked. Rethak lowered his muzzle. From the ridge east of the clearing, the human shuttle descended. It left almost immediately. The ground party remained. The Aelari party approached from the south. They knelt. All of them? All 11? And the humans? The male and female remained standing. The armed ones moved behind them. The wounded female was placed as attendant. Thrihiel laughed again, softer this time. Not because it was funny, because it was perfect. The Coalition had done what the Coalition always did. They had come armed with doctrine, fear of contamination, and the desperate hope that history would politely wait while they arranged procedure around it. Then they had stepped out of the sky in front of a civilization whose religion already possessed places for sky-descending figures of day and night. Hansen had been received as a god. Himura, too, Aurelian and Salunara returned. Thrihiel bared his teeth, not in anger. "Captain Hansen," he said, "you continue to be more useful than you intend." Rethak did not answer. Good. Rethak was not stupid enough to mistake thought for invitation. Thrihiel turned away from the scouts and walked to the central crate where the extracted Kestrel data waited on a hardened slate. He activated the display. Aelari religious maps filled the air in dull blue projection, village networks, priesthood routes, pilgrimage paths, seasonal rites, minor cultic factions, contradictory marginalia compiled by patient human observers who had believed themselves invisible. He admired that about the humans. They recorded everything. Their guilt made them thorough. He enlarged the section on the Western Road network. Kestrel's researchers had marked several religious subgroups around the hall, cross-referenced with oral traditions, burial practices, seasonal offerings, and conflict incidents. Marsh's annotations appeared in the margins. Careful, measured, insufferably ethical, Thrihiel skimmed past the major priesthoods. Aurelian's daykeepers, Salunara's night tenders, Korath's stonebearers, Thalor's rain singers. There, Veleth, wolf-masked threshold figure, trickster, tester, boundary crosser, ambiguous protector and adversary, associated with locked doors, suspicion, bargains, riddles, roads used by the desperate, and warnings against accepting gifts too easily. He smiled. Every civilization had a god for the truths respectable people needed, but did not want to bless directly. The Kestrel file split Veleth's clergy into 3 regional patterns: harmless village performers, road shrine keepers, and one faction near the western approach to the hall whose leadership had grown increasingly oppositional to Selenara's priesthood over the last 3 generations. The name rendered imperfectly through human phonetics. Kethris, a priest, not a god. Though if the reports were current, Kethris had spent many years cultivating ambiguity around that distinction. A clever little man, if the images were accurate. Too old to fight openly. Too proud to remain secondary. Too religious to call ambition ambition. The best kind of tool. One who believed the hand using him was merely revealing what he had always deserved to become. Thrihiel opened the cultural note. Kethris's faction believed Valeth's role had been deliberately diminished by the moon priesthood after an older prophetic cycle. They taught that Veleth did not oppose the divine pair, but tested whether those claiming to serve them had become weak, comfortable, and blind. They preserved fragmentary sayings about a masked return before the heart beneath the moon opened. Thrihiel leaned closer. Mythologically promised but historically suppressed. Human anthropologists did enjoy giving long names to useful fractures. He reviewed the scout sketches from earlier days. A western shrine, wolf masks, bronze knives, black-painted staffs, offerings of smoked meat, bitter root, and river stones bound in red cord. Less wealth than the central temple networks. More resentment, more theatricality, more hunger. Excellent. Rethak, he said. The scout captain straightened. Commander, prepare gifts. For the village? No. Thrihiel turned back to the projection. The village has already been claimed. The Aelari around Avenel would be useless for direct approach now. They had seen Hansen and Himura. They had knelt. They had likely wept, offered food, and begun rearranging every memory of their lives around the arrival. Faith, once given a face, became difficult to redirect. But faith had enemies, not disbelief. That was a human error. They often imagined faith was weakened by doubt. Sometimes, not always. More often, faith was sharpened by rival interpretation. The question was not whether the gods had returned. The question was who understood why. The coalition would try to reduce harm. They would avoid declarations. They would speak in careful phrases about danger and protection while trying not to confirm what everyone had already decided. Hansen was probably standing too straight and hating every second. Himura would be composed and furious. The Marines would pretend to be ceremonial guards because one of them was smart enough to see that denying the role would only make it more powerful. Predictable. Decent. Limited. Thrihiel tapped Kethris's name on the display. Here was the path, not to challenge the divine pair directly. That would be crude, and crude manipulation of religion was for warlords with more appetite than imagination. No. He would approach Kethris as a priest whose god had been promised a role in the return, but whose role had been suppressed by rivals. Veleth, the boundary crosser, the tester of false certainty, the keeper of locked doors. If Aurelian and Selinara had come, then Veleth must also be acknowledged. If the Hall of the Moon's heart was to open, then someone must test whether the returned pair were truly ready. He did not need Kethris to disbelieve Hansen. He needed Kethris to believe him incompletely. That was much easier. "Gold," Thrihiel said. Rethak's ears shifted. "How much?" "Too much." The scout blinked. Thrihiel smiled. "If the gift seems reasonable, he will treat us as traitors. If it seems excessive, he will search for divine explanation. Give him more than his faction normally sees in a season." "Yes, Commander?" "And the weapons." "The bronze pieces?" "The finest, not the practical ones. The ceremonial blades from the eastern cache. The matched spears." Rethak hesitated. "Those would purchase 3 guides and a month of silence. They will purchase something better. An audience. A hunger." Rethak lowered his head. "Yes, Commander?" Thrihiel dismissed him with one claw. When the scout left, Thrihiel remained before the projection. He knew what Hansen would think if Hansen learned of this. Exploitation, contamination, desecration, all accurate words. Thrihiel had never minded accurate words. He minded cowardice hiding behind them. Yes, he was exploiting the Aelari religion. Of course he was. Their religion was already built around the thing he sought, distorted through centuries of ritual, fear, politics, and weather. The humans wanted to step delicately around that fact and pretend restraint preserved innocence. But innocence had ended the moment the first precursor buried a node beneath the hall and left a Bronze Age people to dream around the machinery. Thrihiel had not created the lie. He had merely arrived too late to feel guilty for using it. That was not entirely true. He was honest enough with himself to admit it. There was guilt somewhere. Not much. Not enough to change conduct, but enough to keep contempt from making him stupid. The Aelari were not fools. They were not props in a myth waiting for superior species to move them around the board. They had minds, customs, loyalties, rivalries, grief. Their small bodies carried full souls, if one preferred poetic language. Thrihiel did not, usually, but he recognized the shape of the thing. That was why the manipulation had to be precise. A brute would threaten Kethris. A fool would claim to be Veleth. Thrihiel would do neither. He would be an envoy of necessity. A traveler from beyond the closed road. A servant of the wolf's question, perhaps. Not God. Not prophet. Nothing so easily disproven. He would offer Kethris the role the Moon priesthood had denied him, and allow Kethris's ambition to supply the theology. People believed most deeply in the lies they helped finish. A soft tone sounded from the field transmitter. Not a message. A warning. The transmitter had been awake long enough. Thrihiel shut down its active array and let the device fold back into passive listening. There were no off-world communications here. Not in any useful sense. His second-hand Lenian cargo hauler sat on the far side of Aelari Prime's moon, hidden from the planet and masked from Singapore by rock, distance, and patient orbital geometry. It was a good hiding place. It was also a wall. From this ground encampment, he had no direct line of sight to the hauler. From the hauler, no line of sight to him. The moon itself sat between them often enough to make routine signal traffic impossible, and any attempt to relay through an exposed drone risked showing Hansen exactly where to look. He had chosen the isolation deliberately. One did not hide a ship and then chatter to it like a nervous merchant. The cost was silence, No updates from orbit. No updates from off-world. No courier drone reports from Houston. Nothing from the abductors, whether triumph, failure, or death. The Houston operation had been planned with that reality understood from the beginning. It had never depended on communicated updates. It had never required him to know the result quickly. Either the mercenaries would take Joseph Thompson and move him through the prepared channels, where Thrihiel would learn when the boy reached the next secured point. Or they would fail. Or they would die. All three outcomes had been accounted for. Planning that required immediate reassurance was not planning. It was anxiety wearing a uniform. Still, he would have preferred to know. Preference was irrelevant. Thrihiel studied the map to the hull of the moon's heart. The node waited beneath sacred stone, or within it, or behind it. The Kestrel data had given geological anomalies, ritual prohibitions, old cave references, and enough corrupted myth to suggest access points. But access was not the same as entry. The Eden device had resisted force. The Trappist artifact remained locked. The network had rules, and Joseph Thompson had become one of them. The thought of the boy tightened something in him. Joseph was not useful dead. Joseph was a key shaped like a child, which was precisely the sort of cruelty the ancient builders seemed to find elegant. If the Houston operation had succeeded, the next phase would proceed through prepared channels without needing him to hold its hand. If it had failed, it would still serve. Hansen would learn eventually, by courier lag and dread. He would divide inside himself between the surface and the boy. Archuleta would harden security. Volkson would worry in that quiet children way. Fevai would continue working because conscience made some people stubborn beyond reason. All useful pressures. Truth required pressure. That was the part the Concord never understood. They mistook stability for virtue because stability made law possible. But history had not been stable. It had been arranged, curated, hidden. Whole species had lived inside ruins and myths while polite institutions built procedures around ignorance. Thrihiel wanted the truth beneath a polite world. If that made him monstrous, then the universe should have hidden fewer monsters under temples. Rethak returned with the first inventory slate. "Gold prepared," he said. "Weapons selected. Shall we include food?" "No. Food creates domestic obligation. I want theological appetite, not hospitality." Rethak adjusted the slate. "Text for envoy? I will give it. You will not go yourself." "Not yet." Kethris needed to receive mystery first. Thrihiel's physical presence was too strong an instrument for initial contact. Kehlar scale, teeth, voice, these could dominate, but domination narrowed imagination. Better to send a smaller envoy first, one of the Aelari guides, dressed better than he deserved, carrying gifts he could not explain without trembling. Fear would season the message. Greed would carry it. Resentment would open the door. Thrihiel began dictating. "To Kethris, keeper of the masked road, servant of the one whose name is spoken at thresholds, a traveler of the western silence requests audience. He brings gifts not to purchase favor, for favor cannot be purchased from those who serve the hidden test. He brings witness. The sun and moon have returned to Avenel, as the night priests proclaim. Yet no return is complete until the closed door asks its question." He paused. Too elegant? No. Aelari priestly speech enjoyed structure. He continued. "The moonhouse will say the road is theirs. The daykeepers will say the light is theirs. But before the heart opens, Valeth must know whether those who come are true, whether those who kneel are wise, and whether those long silenced still remember their charge." Rethak's ears lifted slightly. Even he understood that one. Thrihiel finished. The traveler asks only to speak before judgment. He offers gold for the shrine, blades for the masked guard, and knowledge for the priest who has waited beside a locked door. He stopped. "Yes," he said. "That will do." Rethak saved the text. "Send it before sunset," Thrihiel said. The envoy travels with 2 shadows, no visible Kehlar escort after the first ridge. If intercepted by moon priests, he is a traitor. If intercepted by Kethras's people, he is expected. And if intercepted by coalition, Thrihiel smiled, then Captain Hansen will have an interesting day. Rethak bowed and withdrew. Thrihiel stood alone with the map. Avenel glowed on the projection in one color, Kethras's western shrine in another. The Hall of the Moon's Heart waited between them, marked by layers of geology, myth, and bloodless academic caution. Somewhere east of him, Hansen and Himura were learning the cost of being adored. Somewhere west, Kethras was about to be offered the role he had spent his life believing had been stolen from him. Far above, hidden behind stone and geometry, the cargo hauler remained silent on the far side of the moon. And beneath the hall, if the ancients had left any honesty in their machines, a truth older than Concord law waited to be opened. Thrihiel closed the projection. He was still smiling. It was important, he thought, to enjoy good fortune when it arrived, even when one had arranged most of it oneself. This has been Part 3 in the Verdant Paradox Book 2 in R.M. Stratton's military sci-fi series Concord Horizon. If you like the audiobook, the ebook is available on Amazon at the link in the description.